Chen Hang was part of society's old elite, but he suddenly returned to his senior year of high school. Now he intends to make changes and improve his relationships while looking straight ahead. Partially covering his face with his hand, in the background, a starry sky and a full moon illuminate the night. He is in a high-rise building when, suddenly, a middle-aged man accompanied by some women approaches and greets him respectfully, calling him Mr. Chen. The man raises his wine glass for a toast, and with a bright look. He praises Chen as a promising young man, however, Chen remains calm and rejects the compliment. The man hesitates at his coldness, but keeps insisting, offering him more alcohol and trying to convince him to trust him, assuring him that he doesn't have to worry about anything. However, Chen looks at him disapprovingly as the other man drinks and, to distract himself, observes his own reflection in the wine glass and for a moment gets lost in his thoughts. His name echoes in his mind, but he no longer recognizes himself. Convinced, he concludes that everyone around him are hypocrites and only treat him that way because he is a millionaire, including the man and the women sitting on the sofa next to him, whose insincerity is evident. Soon, a young woman named Jean May appears, who comments that Chen's future wife will be very lucky. However, the man accompanying them corrects her, saying that Chen is single and is one of the most coveted catches at the moment. Jean, a little embarrassed, sits next to him and soon realizes his sophistication and high standards, holding a business card. She wishes for an opportunity to be noticed. Determined, Jean approaches and begins to praise Chen, talking about the importance of balancing family and career. He listens to her in silence. Then she discreetly leans in and hands him her business card, hoping he will accept it. Chen takes the card with a slight smile and Jean smiles radiantly. On the table, there is a bottle of alcohol. The man notices that Chen has barely had a drink, but he still offers to take him home. Chen firmly refuses, saying his house is close enough to go on his own. He sighs. He walks to his car, holding his jacket with one hand and putting the other on the door handle. Suddenly, a loud meow catches his attention near the vehicle's wheels. He crouches down and finds a small orange cat, lifting it into his arms. Chen comments that the kitten was lucky to have been noticed, because otherwise it could have been run over. Then, he releases the kitten, which quickly runs off before disappearing into the darkness. The cat looks at him one last time. The car's headlights shine brightly, illuminating the night. Chen settles into the front seat. He closes his eyes and relaxes. When he opens them again, he looks out the window and sees the same orange kitten next to two adult cats. At that moment, he remembers his own family and realizes that he hasn't visited them in a long time. Determined, he starts the car and puts his hand on the gear shift, preparing to drive home. With his seatbelt on, he reaches into his shirt pocket and pulls out a large number of business cards. Among them is Jean's, marked with a lipstick stain. Chen looks at the cards for a long moment, thoughtfully. Then, without hesitation, he throws them. All the cards fall messily to the ground. Some are carried away by the wind, and others he simply steps on as he drives off without looking back. Chen drives under the city lights at night, with many skyscrapers visible in the background. He keeps one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on his chin, looking out the window while listening to music. After a while, his gaze turns to the road and his hand firmly grips the steering wheel. He confidently increases his speed, following the words of the song about 500 kilometers per hour. Suddenly, a huge truck approaches him, with its headlights shining on him. The protagonist's eyes fly wide open. The horror and fear are visible in his gaze. Suddenly, a girl calls out to him. She's wearing a long dress and has a bicycle. The girl says that smoking is forbidden there. Chen closes his eyes, holding his head with one hand as it suddenly starts to hurt. He opens one eye and tries to understand what exactly has happened to him and where he is. The girl in the long dress is in front of him, with a surprised expression on her face. The people in the background are surprised by his carelessness. The guy sitting on the bench coughs and the protagonist is confused because he doesn't recognize the person sitting next to him. His eyes open wide in complete disbelief. It seemed like it was all just a dream. The protagonist remains perplexed by what's happening, and suddenly, as his companion gives him a confused look, he notices something. He notices his reflection near the bench where they are sitting. His eyes widen even more, and sweat appears on his face. He wonders if this is some kind of time travel. The guy understands absolutely nothing of what's going on. The dark-haired girl looks down uncomfortably, staying silent and waiting for at least some reaction from Chen. The protagonist gets his face grabbed. The man tells him that his behavior is unusual and that this shouldn't be done under any circumstances. The stranger, a tall man, clenches his hand into a fist and says he hopes the protagonist has a happy future and recovers from a broken heart. The protagonist is annoyed by the stranger's persistent words. His friend sitting next to him on the bench is confused, not understanding what happened to the young man. Chen leans over, holding a cigarette in his hands. The protagonist's expression turns incredibly grim, and he asks the tall man, in a serious and cold tone, who he is. Horror is visible on the tall man's face at such a reaction, and he decides he needs to leave, saying that Chen doesn't deserve so much attention. Meanwhile, the girl just looks at him in silence, but then she finally decides to speak. The girl says that if Chen really wants to ignore her, that's fine, but she makes it clear that she doesn't want a relationship right now and that his opinion won't change anything. Chen looks at her with concern when she mentions it. The girl also tells him that if he keeps it up, she'll tell his mother about his smoking. The protagonist doesn't even remember who his mother is, but he's afraid of her finding out. He gets extremely angry and doesn't understand how the girl knows about his mother. The friend is still looking on with a confused expression. And the tall man is getting more and more angry as the minutes pass. The girl hands him a bottle of water and informs him that he needs to show up for registration later. Chen refuses the offer, and the tall man complains that the protagonist is just pretending to be a tough guy. Suddenly, the girl falls silent and doesn't understand the hero's behavior. She slowly extends the hand holding the water bottle toward him. Then she leaves the bottle on the seat, and with a dissatisfied look, she turns and leaves. But Chen doesn't comment on this at all. He just watches as the girl and the tall guy leave on a bike. He asks his friend if he really confessed his feelings. The friend puts his hand on his shoulder and asks him to stop pretending. The protagonist realizes that this is the girl he had a crush on when he was a student. He turns his questioning gaze to the guy beside him and asks who he is. His best friend, named Wang Sibo, grabs him by the shirt, shouting that he's his best friend and they always used to smoke together. The protagonist questions if he's that Sibo who went to Idak. This makes his friend even angrier. After a while, they walk down a typical Chinese street where there are many shops and 3-story houses. The friend asks him not to drink so much because of the tuition. The protagonist replies that he understands. After a bit, they arrive at the classroom. The protagonist receives congratulations for passing his exams. His teacher, with a slight smile and closed eyes, hands him an acceptance letter. His friend is surprised that he passed the first level exam, and Chen mentions that he also passed the second level without any problem. Then, the young man looks at his smiling teacher named Lao Su. The protagonist remembers that this teacher won't survive an illness caused by cigarettes, and that, unfortunately, he won't be able to attend his funeral because he will be abroad in the future. Meanwhile, Wang thanks the teacher for his guidance. At that moment, Chen realizes that he has indeed gone back in time. Suddenly, the young man notices a red pack of cigarettes on the table next to a pen and a stack of papers. The protagonist quickly grabs the cigarettes for himself under the surprised gazes of his teacher and friend, and tells Lao Su to smoke less. Chen looks at the teacher with the pack of cigarettes in his hand and reminds him that teaching in high school is already hard, but smoking will only make it worse. The teacher looks at Chen with obvious confusion, as he clearly didn't expect such words from him. But the teacher just laughs lightly and tells the protagonist he'll smoke less in the future. The protagonist says he's taking the cigarettes now just to be sure, which surprises his friend and the teacher even more. The tall guy is outraged, wondering why Chen got accepted into the top university. A girl tries to defend him, saying that Chen always had good grades and that their conflict is just a misunderstanding. The guy doesn't want to hear any of it and remains indignant. The girl keeps defending Chen and tries to explain the reason for his smoking. The guy interrupts her and calls the protagonist a criminal and a brawler. Just then, Chen and his friend appear behind him. Chen walks up to the girl he had a crush on and asks where she's going to study now. The girl blushes a little and replies that she's going to study at Tongye University. The young man tells her that he's going to the neighboring University of Finance and Economics. The guy next to them tries to humiliate him, but it doesn't work, because the protagonist doesn't even pay him any mind. He asks what time it is, and the girl looks at her watch, saying it's 5:20. The protagonist takes her hand and asks her where she bought the watch, and also suggests that the time means I love you. The tall guy pushes him away indignantly, accusing him of trying to assert his feelings for the girl, but Chen doesn't react to this. He decides to walk away while the tall guy shouts angrily behind him. Meanwhile, a loudspeaker bolted to a tall pole emits sounds of music. The sun's rays shine through the windows, illuminating an empty classroom where the Chinese flag on the wall stands out intensely. Chen walks calmly outside of the school with a sign in his hands, watching the uniformed students walking nearby. He looks to the side and sees a group of boys playing basketball and trying to shoot the ball into the hoop. The students walking by are talking and laughing with each other, discussing something interesting. The protagonist watches the sun that illuminates his tired but relaxed face. He closes his eyes, enjoying the sun, the last rays of light illuminating the street gradually disappear, giving way to the night. 1. He walks alongside his best friend. The protagonist thinks that for the first time in several years, he has the chance to go home. 2. Someone behind them calls his name, making Chen and Sibo turn around. 3. They notice the girl Xiao Yang and the boy they met earlier at school. The protagonist is not happy to see them again. Xiao approaches him on her bike and says that he and his friend didn't write anything in her memory book. The protagonist looks at her in silence, lowering his curious gaze. Xiao, slightly embarrassed, takes a memory book from her bicycle basket, holds the notebook in her hand and hands it to Chen, asking him to write something as a memento for her. The tall guy looks at the protagonist with even more irritation and displeasure than expected, demanding that Chen write something good instead of looking down. The girl blushes a little and asks the young man to stop looking at her, but the protagonist makes an excuse, saying he's just looking at the notebook. He opens his classmate's notebook and starts to see what's already written there. The notebook is full of well wishes. His attention is drawn to a poem by William Yeats that the tall guy, named Gone, wrote and passed off as his own. Xiao points with her pen to the blank page in the notebook and demands that the young man write something instead of reading the whole notebook. After that, the protagonist decides to give the notebook to his best friend to write in it first, but the friend still doesn't know what to write and therefore feels embarrassed. Wang writes that he wishes for Xiao to become more and more beautiful over the years. Then, the notebook returns to Chen's hands, and he should write something in it. But aside from the wish to stay young, he can't come up with anything. After thinking for a moment, the protagonist slowly begins to write his wishes in Xiao's notebook. He writes her a short poem with a play on words, but the tall guy makes fun of him and the other girl thinks the poem is unique. Xiao looks carefully at the notebook and notices that the verse is very well written. She warns Chen that he won't tell his mother he smoked. Down encourages him to go home, citing the fact that it will get dark soon. Chen and Wang watched the group leave. His friend is indignant because he forced him to sign the notebook first. The protagonist teases him by asking if he has feelings for Xiao, which his friend immediately denies. They walk together and the protagonist suggests going to a burger place tomorrow. His best friend is very surprised. And Chen explains the choice, saying that he has a family dinner tonight. Xiao looks at the protagonist and asks if he can skip the dinner. The protagonist turns into the alley and leaves his friend alone, saying that he doesn't understand anything. His friend looks at him blankly, without saying a single word. The protagonist walks down the narrow alley, which is lit by a streetlight and signs from various establishments. The young man recalls several moments from his childhood. For example, when, as a child, he came home with a dirty school uniform and his mother scolded him for it. Or when, as a teenager, his mother asked him to bring her food, but he refused. He also remembers a specific day, sitting late at night with a huge pile of textbooks, doing his homework. The protagonist remembers a middle-aged man at the club flattering him. In the future, Chen thinks about his childhood, adolescence, and his future, of which he already knows what will happen. The protagonist approaches the red door that is locked behind the metal gate. He looks at this door and stands still. A slight smile touches his lips and a lone lamp illuminates his face as he stands in the entryway. The young man raises his hand to the door and starts knocking, demanding that his mother open it. His mother suddenly opens the door, annoyed that he is yelling so loudly, and tells him that he always forgets his keys. The protagonist enters the house complaining that it's hot and he needs to turn on the air conditioner while wondering where his father is. He takes the air conditioner remote in his hands. His mother informs him that his father is still at work, then she gives the protagonist a plate with several slices of watermelon. Chen is surprised and soon starts to eat. He thanks his mother and she tells him to eat calmly. While he eats on the couch, his mother asks him to take a shower later and put his college admission documents on the table. The protagonist happily eats the watermelon and finds himself thinking that the watermelon still tastes the same, as familiar as before. In a tall building, the lights are on in the middle of a dark night. Chen's mother holds the college acceptance letter in her hands. She smiles with pride and is happy that there is now a college student in the family. The protagonist is in the bathroom, listening to his mother's plans for his future life. The woman is already thinking about his college graduation and her grandchildren. The protagonist smiles wryly as he looks in the mirror, mentally saying that his mother will not see her grandchildren for the next 35 years. The protagonist is distracted from his thoughts by the noise coming from his apartment's living room. The young man, happy, gets out of the shower, realizing that his father has already returned home. The protagonist's father stands in the living room and unbuttons his shirt, confirming his return at the same time. Despite the obvious fatigue, something important catches Chen's father's attention. He grabs the air conditioner remote and adjusts the temperature to keep the family comfortable. Suddenly, the furious mother bursts into the room with a coat and a pack of cigarettes, accusing Chen of smoking. The protagonist tries to justify to his parents that the teacher gave him cigarettes to pass his exams. But the mother doesn't believe him and accuses the father of not paying attention to their son. The father says it's too early for Chen to be smoking, and the mother adds that the father should also smoke less, and it's time for everyone to sit at the table. Now, the protagonist's parents are sitting on the bed, and she asks him to give their son some money for him to take to college. The father says that they should let their son do what he wants. The mother looks at her husband with concern and complains that over time, their son has started to listen to her less. Although they have always encouraged his ideas, the father points out that their son may not be the best student, but his intelligence won't let him fail and they must support him. Chen's mother listens attentively to everything her husband says about their son's future, looking away, lost in her own thoughts about him. Dawn is breaking on an ordinary street in China. The streetlights are still on. On the nightstand, there is an alarm clock indicating that it's time to get up. The protagonist, not thinking about anything, is partially covered with a blanket. He turns his gaze to the alarm clock that is sitting quietly on the nightstand, then looks around the room, especially at the manga on the bookshelf, and realizes that he definitely wants to stay there. Meanwhile, a strong stream of water flows from the bathroom faucet. The mother comments that Chen woke up early today. The protagonist calmly brushes his teeth and looks at his tired mother, telling her that he's hungry. The mother yawns and tells him that he can buy his own breakfast because she's going back to bed to sleep. Chen says nothing, but thinks that this is clearly not the way to raise a child. After a while, the young man arrives near a street food stall in a playground and asks the price of an egg pancake. After the vendor's reply, he is mentally surprised by the low price and asks for 2 of them for himself. Chen wonders where the payment and the code are. The vendor looks at him, completely bewildered, and doesn't understand what Cody is talking about. The protagonist looks like he's been electrocuted when he realizes that it's 2002 and he can't pay with his phone. And he realizes he has no money on him, his mother didn't leave him any, and the vendor asks if he's going to buy it. The protagonist refuses and quickly makes up an excuse, saying that the pancakes are unhealthy because his grandmother told him so. Then he goes home disappointed, mentally complaining that the payment system and life in the past were extremely inconvenient. Chen is abruptly distracted from his thoughts by noticing something in front of him. Xiao is running, visibly out of breath in a running suit. The protagonist calls out to her and she immediately turns her attention to him. Xiao looks surprised. She didn't expect to see him now. The girl looks at him and asks what he's doing there so early, since it's only 6:30 in the morning. Suddenly, a thought crosses her mind. But she doesn't have time to finish the thought she just had. The protagonist greets her, but she quickly interrupts him and tells him she knows why he's there. The girl puts her hands on her hips and repeats once more that she doesn't want to be in a relationship right now. The protagonist freezes because he didn't expect such a conclusion from the girl. Xiao assumes that he got up so early precisely to watch her. She looks at him with her arms crossed and asks him if he was trying to get her attention when he ignored her yesterday. Chen remains silent. He gets awkward and listens to the girl say that he's a good guy, but that she doesn't need a relationship and that they can only discuss it after graduation. The protagonist realizes that this is precisely the reason why they aren't dating yet. Xiao continues, saying she doesn't want to get distracted, thinking to herself about the promise she made throughout school not to get into a relationship. Xiao asks him not to comment because everything is clear, and Chen agrees, saying that she's smart. Then he invites her to breakfast, where they can talk. Xiao feels embarrassed and points out that she should be the one to invite him because he helps her so much with her studies. The protagonist agrees with her and suggests going to a shop near the police station, which has soy milk and savory bean pastries. He says it will be delicious. The restaurant is a bright yellow color and there are several regular police officers and passers-by. An acquaintance greets Xiao, and she greets him back happily and politely. Meanwhile, the protagonist enjoys his favorite food. Uncle Jean tells him that Chen eats too much and doesn't understand the harm in overeating. The protagonist looks at him, questioning, while eating another pastry. The young man claims that he will be in perfect shape until he's 30 years old. Xiao asks how he knows, and he explains that a few days ago he met a fortune teller, so he knows his future for sure, and then he continues eating. Chen also says that he will be rich and successful, but unfortunately without a wife because he has no marriage line. The girl gets angry and says that's absurd, because men's opinions and feelings change quickly. Chen replies that a fortune teller taught him how to read palms, explaining that each palm pattern is unique and shows a person's destiny. The young man points out that the buns made by the owner or his wife will be different. He tells them that the owner's buns are smooth, but his wife makes them with folds. Xiao is skeptical of such a claim. Then, they both turn their puzzled and somewhat awkward gazes toward the restaurant owners to see how they work and make the buns. She watches as the owner and his wife make the buns themselves. The girl pays attention to the board where the buns are and sees that they really do have completely different textures and shapes. She observes this with surprise, and at that moment, the protagonist thinks to himself that she has no basic knowledge about baking because the shape of the bun depends on its filling, and that's the whole secret. The protagonist gets Xiao's attention and holds out his hand, which makes the girl quickly pull away to avoid the attention of the restaurant owner and his wife. The protagonist, with a mischievous expression on his face, thinks that with the help of fortune-telling, he can confuse a person. He holds out his hand and invites the girl to look at his palm. Xiao asks, "What are you doing?" But he replies that it's just fortune-telling. After thinking about it for a moment, the girl finally decides to trust him with the fortune-telling. The protagonist looks at her hand and, explaining the meaning of the patterns according to Confucianism, tells her that if the lifeline is long, then she will be healthy and happy. 3. Xiao is surprised by this statement, as she didn't expect such serious words from the protagonist. 4. He points to a wisdom line on her hand, saying that she likes to fantasize, and also that she will be happy. The young man calls the marriage line confusing, and then tells her she needs to stay away from the boys flocking around her and be more careful. The young man makes a dramatic pause and says that he seems to have discovered who her ideal husband is, which surprises her. He takes her hand and tells her that her ideal husband is right in front of her. The girl, outraged, pulls her hand away and Chen quickly thanks her for breakfast. The young man walks casually towards the restaurant exit and prepares to go home. The restaurant owner's wife looks at him with a piercing, suspicious gaze. Chen tells the owner's wife that the girl paid for his breakfast. At that moment, a police officer enters the restaurant and then turns around, observing the protagonist carefully. The protagonist holds a toothpick in his mouth and looks at him questioningly, thinking that these people look familiar. The police officer is talking behind him, and the restaurant owner's wife looks at him disapprovingly. The protagonist turns around completely confused, trying to understand what is happening. The restaurant owner's wife starts talking to the police officer and points her finger at Chen. The police officer suddenly turns around and looks at the protagonist along with the restaurant owner's wife. The police officer's eyes narrow, and he looks on with dissatisfaction upon seeing the young man. Chen seems surprised and quickly says goodbye to Xiao, saying that he needs to go home urgently because he has work to do. He starts running, realizing that this police officer is Xiao's father. Early in the morning, a blue double-decker bus is at the Gani bus station stop, gradually filling up with passengers. The protagonist and his best friend discuss the difference between university girls and high school girls, and the fact that, unlike school, university is a student's choice. The protagonist is not happy that his friend is asking him so many questions, but then his friend mentions that he saw her looking at the protagonist. He quickly looks out the window, and Sibo realizes that he's interested in the topic. The young man watches the girl next to her father from the window, near a car with its hood open. The friend says that Xiao's father's car broke down, and that the protagonist hasn't seen her since the confrontation with her father at the restaurant. The girl notices someone is watching her and turns her head towards her observer. She looks away in disgust when she sees Chen. Meanwhile, the bus driver asks if everything is okay with the captain. The police officer replies that the car broke down and he wanted to take his daughter to the university. The driver offers to give them a ride, since it's no bother and he's heading in their direction. The police captain's attention is drawn by a voice asking if his car broke down. It turns out to be that tall guy named Gown, who offers to help her by giving her a ride to the university. The guy promises to keep her safe and says there are a lot of people on the bus, so it will be easier to reach the destination by car. The protagonist watches and thinks that the captain will refuse. The captain is tired of the day's failures, but he doesn't trust the wealthy Gon and believes he has bad intentions. So he decides to ask his daughter what she prefers, whether to travel by bus or with Gown by car. He waits for his daughter's answer at that moment. Gown beams with hope and happiness, but Xiao chooses to travel by bus. The protagonist has no words to comment on the situation. Then, Chen invites his friend to sit in another seat, but Sibo refuses. He asks his best friend to move so Xiao can sit next to him. Sibo asks why the young man won't switch seats, and he replies that he feels sick. The girl gets on the bus and stops in the aisle by Chen's seats. He looks out the window, and his best friend has his eyes closed. But although he is disgusted, Sibo switches places even though he is very angry. The protagonist looks out the window, and the policeman asks him to take care of his daughter as their universities are close. Chen says that he will definitely take care of Xiao, which surprises Gon, who is nearby. The bus moves quickly down the sunny road without making any stops. Sibo is annoyed with his seat because the curtain is broken and there are still 5 hours of travel left. Chen asks the teacher to give his friend a visor, as he won't be able to handle such a long trip in the Sunday. He then tells Xiao that it's very hot and says he got up early today, so he's going to sleep now. He closes his eyes, and the girl thinks that he's trying to avoid talking to her that way. She turns away, dissatisfied, and suddenly, the young man rests his head on her shoulder and actually falls asleep. Meanwhile, Xiao's father's intuition tells him that something isn't right. After his daughter gets on the bus continues to travel quickly down the road without slowing down. After a while, the bus heads towards the bridge and a boat can be seen in the water in the distance. The passengers shout that it's the Yanxi Bridge, which wakes up the protagonist. He sleepily looks out the window and gets distracted by the girl who is staring at him. Chen watches her with interest. He realizes that, up close, she is even more beautiful than usual. Chen maintains a neutral expression, and the girl asks him if he was surprised by the sight of the bridge. Chen looks away as if ignoring her question and then sharply turns towards her. The girl abruptly turns away with her eyes wide open and her face completely red. The protagonist looks at her with a slight smile and asks if she was surprised by this bridge. The girl is still in shock and looks at him with a clear blush on her cheeks, very embarrassed by what is happening on the bus. The protagonist tells the girl that he has been to this city, and not only has he crossed the bridge, but he has also seen the local attractions, so it's hard to surprise him with anything. The girl looks at him as if there's some misunderstanding, and after a while, finally, they arrive at the bus station and get ready to get off. At the station, people are getting off several different buses. Sibo complains about the heavy suitcases, while the hero himself says he warned him not to bring so much stuff. Xiao is strangely surrounded by 3 large suitcases and is surprised by the lack of stuff Chen is carrying. but he says everything is already at the university and his mom will send him the rest. The girl is surprised at the protagonist's ability to figure things out, realizing it could have been done in a simpler way. Chen calls her simple-minded. He gives her a tip on how to get to her university and tells her the exact route. The girl asks him how he'll get to the university, and he replies that he and his friend have already decided to take a walk through the park. The girl completely freezes and then yells out Chen's name, which surprises the young man and Sibo. 1. Xiao is furious and remembers that the protagonist had promised to take care of her. She glares at them intensely, watching their backs and waiting for some kind of reaction. 2. The people at the station are closely watching what's happening. 3. The protagonist turns toward her, visibly nervous, and asks her not to yell. 4. He slowly extends his hand toward her, but Xiao just moves away, irritated, trying to get his attention. The protagonist whispers that they should leave quickly before the bystanders think they're a couple. This statement infuriates the girl even more, and she glares at Chen's hand indignantly, as if trying to smooth the situation over. The young man offers to walk with her and sees a tear roll down the furious girl's cheek. She declares that he was leaving her behind. The protagonist tries to calm her down, telling her he'll help carry her stuff to the station and won't abandon her. The upset girl bites his hand, causing the bystanders to be deeply shocked, who even think Chen might be a bully. After a while, the entire trio sits awkwardly at a bus stop, surrounded by suitcases and bags. Chen's hand is partially hidden in his pocket and shows a pretty bad bite mark. The girl looks guiltily at the protagonist's hand but doesn't say anything about it. The protagonist looks at the ground in embarrassment, believing his reputation is ruined and everyone thinks he's a scumbag. Xiao also feels weird, realizing that maybe the protagonist wants to find a girlfriend. She feels very jealous but understands there's nothing she can do. Her shoulders are slumped, and she gets Chen's attention by calling his name. The protagonist closes his eyes and sighs heavily. Seeing the girl's condition, he opens his eyes and a slight smile appears on his lips, then he asks if she's mad at him. The girl looks at him with wide, teary eyes full of shame, lowers her gaze, and timidly nods in response. The protagonist says that a missed walk in the park is no big deal. But the girl disagrees, shaking her head. Sibo invites him to go with him to the university or to meet up later. Then his friend quickly leaves, leaving him alone. Chen is surprised by his friend's action, while Xiao remains silent. The protagonist calls out to the girl, who is still crying, telling her not to worry and to come with him. Sihao quickly wipes her tears with her hand and agrees to go with the protagonist. Chen takes most of the luggage, leaving the girl to carry only one suitcase, looks ahead carefully, and drops the girl off at her dorm. Before walking away, the protagonist takes off his glasses and says that the trouble is over. He lowers his hand to his pants pocket, and the edge of a white piece of paper is visible. A pretty girl gave him her dorm phone number, saying he can contact her anytime, while a disgruntled girl stands in the background. The protagonist holds the piece of paper in his hands and smiles happily, thinking it's impossible to refuse something like this. Meanwhile, in the background, a red banner with golden characters is seen welcoming students facing the main entrance of the university. The protagonist realizes he hadn't actually been here in 10 years. Among the crowd of students walking through the campus, a girl with long bangs can be seen. She is in a hurry and suddenly bumps into the protagonist, causing the piece of paper he was given to fall from his hands. With visible irritation, the protagonist looks at the person who pushed him. 2, the girl immediately starts to apologize, and he can't help but notice she is immensely pretty. 3, the young man smiles in response to her apology and tells her it's not necessary. The girl thanks him and quickly flees the scene of the collision, which leaves the protagonist surprised. He picks up the fallen piece of paper and tries to remember the girl he just met. Chen keeps walking and thinks about how quickly this stranger ran away. At that moment, 2 people are sitting at a table, an old man and a happy-looking girl. When the protagonist approaches that table, they ask him if he is a student, to which he confirms. The girl sitting at the table turns out to be his classmate, whose name is Simo. Then the girl introduces the old man, saying he is the professor named Wo. The professor tells him to fill out the information and head to the dorm. The protagonist finishes filling out the papers, and a crowd of students can be seen gathering behind him. The girl informs him that he will be living in the 3rd building. in room 6002. The protagonist thanks and says goodbye to the girl and the professor. He carefully observes the different university students, noting that they are much more beautiful and attractive than the students from his school. As he looks at the girls, he understands what attracts the attention of other guys and why they chose this university. He sighed heavily and carries the bag in his hands. Now, the young man believes he needs to earn money before trying to find a girl. At that moment, the bulletin board is full of various notices and papers where it's hard to find a specific ad, but he finally finds what he's looking for and hopes it will help him earn money in the future. The evening sky slowly turns to night and the lights turn on. In the dorm where the protagonist lives, the young man walks tiredly through the hallways, thinking about how many people there are. Chen smiles happily, thinking about how long it's been since he was in this room. He places his hand on the door, opening it slightly and allowing a bit of light into the hallway. The protagonist thinks his roommates are still the same. He smiles and cheerfully greets his neighbors, asking them if he was the last one to arrive. At that moment, the protagonist catches the attention of 3 people at the same time, but one of them is especially happy to see him. The guy in the yellow t-shirt shakes his hand and introduces himself as Yang. His attention turns to the 2 remaining roommates. The one wearing a blue shirt introduces himself as Chan and the other as Yen. Then, 2 more students appear. The one wearing glasses introduces himself as Lee and the other is Jin. At that moment, Jun is surprised that Jin has the latest Motorola model, and Jin proudly confirms it. The protagonist is happy that they are still the same and have not changed at all. Jin offers the protagonist cigarettes, saying that he is the oldest. Chan listens attentively and invites them to number off according to their age. When the youngest one receives the cigarettes, he feels embarrassed, but Lee and Jin refuse the cigarettes. The oldest guy is surprised by the refusal, and the second guy says that there are few types of cigarettes in the dorm, and Jin says that those are very cheap and low-quality cigarettes. He starts making recommendations about cigarettes as there are lighter and tastier options. The oldest guy feels embarrassed and says that in his town he only smoked those cigarettes, but he had not heard of others. The protagonist thinks about how friendly the students are for being able to talk about even such a simple topic. Meanwhile, the young man thinks about the 4 years of study he has ahead of him. With a cigarette in his mouth, he looks at the dorm room door with disgust and thinks that for 4 years, everything here will shock his roommates. Hearing a noise and turning towards its source, his roommates ask him what he is doing. He replies that they must keep the room clean. The oldest one suggests making the protagonist the room leader, and the others praise his decision on cleanliness. His roommates discuss how much responsibility he will have, being responsible for sleeping, eating, and even resolving conflicts. The protagonist replies that he will have no problem accepting the position, and his roommates look at him with surprise and admiration. At night, words of praise can be heard for the protagonist for his responsibility and courage. Morning arrives, and the sun shines brightly, illuminating the streets. In the morning, the protagonist wakes up to the sound of Jin's phone ringing too loudly. Lee tells Chan that he needs to go to class, then tells him he needs a uniform. The protagonist stretches with an air of accomplishment, and suddenly, he realizes something important. He jumps out of bed and says, "It is time to find the girls." Suddenly, they get outside, and several students can be seen dressed in camouflage. In the class, there are a large number of girls dressed in camouflage. The protagonist says that his friends are not very handsome or young, but Chan invites his friends to go meet the girls. Several of his friends get embarrassed by this proposal and do not respond. The protagonist confidently approaches a group of girls and tells one of them that a military uniform is for girls to communicate with each other. Among them, the girl named Hulk, whom he already knows, greets him and she is happy to see him again. Hulk says he is the only one of the 27 boys who dared to approach the girls. The protagonist introduces himself and asks if any of his group is from the province. One of the girls with a ponytail raises her hand and says she is from this province. Chen's roommates are impressed by his flirting skills and say that people like him are always popular. One of the girls says that the first year is very heavy and hopes he can handle his roommates. The confidence is visible in the protagonist's eyes, and he says he needs to help the teacher manage the group. Suddenly, the young man sees the girl he met yesterday and asks who she is. Hulk says he forgot to introduce her. The girl blushes deeply and steps away. Hulk explains to the protagonist that this girl is named Yu and is his classmate. The girl hides behind her back and then completely leaves. Hulk asks not to comment on this and explains that this girl has no parents, her grades are low, and she studies on credit. The protagonist remembers that Yu is a diligent and intelligent student. Chen recalls a moment from the undergraduate graduation ceremony. On that day, Yu borrowed an incredibly beautiful dress from someone and surprised the entire university, remembers the details of the outfit, and admires the girl's beauty. The young man remembers that their ties were broken in the future, but this time he will not allow that to happen. Already in the classroom, the teacher coughs and draws the students' attention, saying that the meeting has already begun. The teacher carefully observes the students in the audience and invites them to introduce themselves. A girl with long red hair stands up and says her name is Jenian. The protagonist's roommates begin to evaluate the girl, and Chen is perplexed by her behavior. Shortly after, the young man's attention is drawn by the awkward and shy voice of a girl. Yu is near the board and briefly talks about herself and her hometown. Chen's roommates are not impressed by the girl, but the protagonist knows what lies beneath that mask. The teacher talks about the need to choose a director, as well as a group representative. The oldest among Chen's roommates invites him to be the representative, and the second roommate says he will be able to help his friends. She concentrates and thinks that she must try harder because there are competitors. She turns to the shy girl and tells her to ignore the boy because they are foolish. Yu feels very embarrassed. Meanwhile, in front of a clear sky, the orders of the teachers that must be followed unconditionally can be heard. A man in a military uniform declares that a boy needs to cut his hair because he does not follow the rules. The indignant student defends his appearance and says that others also have long hair. Some students wonder if they will also have to cut their hair, which makes some girls hysterical while the girls decide. Some students wonder if they will also have to cut their hair, which makes some girls go hysterical while the girls decide. Defending his right to have long hair, the protagonist sees the girl Hux running away and decides he needs to show who the real leader is. He calls the teacher and asks him what he's doing. This immediately provokes a reaction from the military instructor. The protagonist stands with his hands in his pockets, while his classmates look at him bewildered. Chen introduces himself and says that he's a second-year public administration student. The teacher is still holding the scissors in his hands, but Chen asks him to put them away so there won't be any trouble. The teacher looks at him with a terrifying look and says that long hair is not allowed in military training, which absolutely scares everyone. A guy indignantly replies that no one will tell him what to do with his hair, but Chen tells him to shut up and explains that the instructor was only invited to the training and nothing more. He asks the instructor what his boss would think if he saw him with the scissors. The instructor remains silent, and Chen thinks that the guy is too afraid of the authorities to object. He questions whether students can't have long hair and asks to see the rule. The young man says that if there really is a rule, he will be the first one to shave his head. The instructor is left speechless and confused, not knowing what to say in response to the student. After a pause, the protagonist suggests wearing caps so their hair won't bother them or distract them during class. The instructor agrees to the option. The protagonist approaches the guy who is arguing with the instructor and tells him to apologize. The guy starts to get indignant and says he has no reason to apologize. The protagonist insists, and the guy quickly obeys. Jackie awkwardly approaches the instructor without looking him in the eye and apologizes. The teacher closes his eyes and clears his throat uncomfortably, thinking about something, and then starts to get them into formation. The girls thank the protagonist for his courage, and some even become interested in him. Hulk takes Ayude by the hand and starts to push her out of the stadium. The protagonist asks his classmates to form a line, encouraging them. The instructor calls the protagonist by his first and last name, then informs him that the young man smoked and therefore broke the rules, so he must run 10 laps. The protagonist's face darkens, and one of his classmates laughs at the situation. Chen says that one of his classmates also smokes, so he should run 5 laps. The instructor decides to punish them both, so the two of them are forced to run 10 laps. After a while, they are already incredibly tired from running, but one of Chen's friends praises him for arguing with the instructor. The protagonist gets angry and says it was Jackie's fault for not getting a haircut. Jackie tries to make amends with the protagonist and offers his help anytime, as well as treating him to dinner. At that moment, he decides to give ice cream to his classmates, and they thank him for it. The girls eat ice cream and discuss who wants to become the class representative and is bribing people this way. One of the girls says the protagonist seems like the best choice, but another one says he'll be difficult to deal with. One of the girls, without thinking twice, says they should just vote for whoever they want. The protagonist understands that it's difficult. The girls will vote for him. He looks at the instructor and the teacher who are at a distance, discussing something between them. The protagonist decides he'll follow his own path to get what he wants, using more influential and important people to do it. Just then, the teacher asks the instructor to notify him immediately of any problems and offers to buy him dinner as an apology. The teacher sighs deeply, clearly not expecting a situation like this with the instructor. The protagonist's voice snaps him out of his thoughts when he offers him a cigarette. The teacher takes it and asks Chen about the conflict. The protagonist confirms that the conflict has been resolved, and the teacher praises him for his initiative, but he doesn't have time to finish speaking because his phone starts ringing. The protagonist listens carefully to the conversation and understands that the teacher is having personal problems and is overworked. The voice on the phone yells at the teacher that he needs to go help, otherwise he might never come back. The teacher stares at the phone in shock, and the protagonist asks if his wife called, offering to pick up the teacher's daughter, though the man has his doubts. The protagonist insists on helping, but the teacher is worried he won't know how to get there. Chen assures him that he knows the city and has family there. After thinking for a moment, the teacher asks if the protagonist knows where Gold Kindergarten is. Chen immediately names the necessary route and even describes the area. The man asks if he lives nearby, and the protagonist says he just made some assumptions. He then asks the teacher to contact the kindergarten teacher and adds that he will show his student ID to verify his identity. The teacher gives the protagonist his phone and tells him the pickup will be at 7 o'clock at the latest. Chen takes the phone and confidently says that the teacher can count on him. Then the young man turns his gaze towards the crowd of students. He looks at Huck, who's talking with some other girls, and tells himself that sometimes it's worth using other means to achieve your goal. The young man arrives near the kindergarten, where many parents can be seen taking their children home. The protagonist introduces himself and says he came to pick up the teacher's daughter. The teacher is suspicious of Chen and asks to call the girl's father to confirm everything. She makes the call and asks if it's true that his student was supposed to pick up his daughter. The father confirms it, and the teacher looks at the protagonist, telling him that she will need his student ID number. She then turns away, still listening to what the father is telling her. The teacher warns that Chen must provide the number, to which he replies that it's no problem and recites all the numbers. The teacher confirms the authenticity of the number and ends the conversation with the girl's father. She apologizes for being suspicious, but the protagonist says there's nothing wrong with that. The teacher explains to the little girl that the student came to pick her up and will take her to her father. Chen asks the girl to come with him, crouching down to her level. Then he asks the little girl to say goodbye to her teacher, which she does. After a while, they go to a restaurant to have lunch and relax. He encourages the girl to eat more and asks her some questions. The girl happily eats a hamburger and agrees to answer everything he asks. Chen asks her if she knows the teacher's number, and the girl says no. The young man asks her a question about the code to pick things up, but the girl doesn't know exactly what it is. There's an awkward pause between them, and Chen gives the girl a shy smile, then says it's time to go home because the girl has already eaten too much. But the little one asks him to stay a bit longer. That night, the protagonist tells the teacher that her daughter is already asleep. The teacher's wife thanks the protagonist as he holds her sleeping daughter in his arms. Chen says there's no need to thank him. The wife gives the young man some fruit as a thank you and invites him to dinner. The professor offers to walk the protagonist to the bus stop. Chen smiles and thanks him for the fruit and for the kindness they've shown. Near the university entrance, many students can be seen minding their own business and sitting on a bench. Chen sits on the bench and smokes. The gifted fruit is in a bag on the bench. The protagonist sees Xiao approaching him, and her gaze is drawn to the fruit in the bag on the bench. Xiao is happy about the fruit and asks him where he bought it. The protagonist says he bought it at a nearby store. The girl listens attentively and is a little surprised by what the protagonist said. She fixes her hair and asks if he called her over just to give her the fruit. The girl says that this fruit is expensive and asks him not to spend so much money. The girl wants to say something, but she's interrupted by someone calling her name. She turns around and sees a guy with glasses who says he didn't expect to find her there. Hello! Everyone greets him, and Xiao mentions that she heard he works at the Institute of Geology of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The guy with glasses goes quiet and observes the protagonist carefully. After a moment, he breaks the awkward silence and asks her who the guy is. The protagonist replies that he's a classmate of Xiao's and then offers the guy a pack of cigarettes, but he refuses it. The guy covers his nose because he clearly doesn't like the smell of cigarettes. He points to the folder with documents and says he has to go so the professor can hand out the topics for tomorrow. Xiao explains to Chen that they wanted to get this guy into the Academy of Sciences, even before he graduated. And one day, he came to them looking for a lab. The girl looks at the protagonist, waiting for a reaction, but he just keeps smoking. After a while, he's still watching her and asks what happened. The girl looks down and says that he offered her a position as a lab assistant. Chen is surprised and looks away. The girl says she didn't accept the job. Chen doesn't react at all, which terribly irritates the girl, who starts getting upset that he's smoking again. She tells him he didn't have this habit before and asks him to think about the future. The young man looks at the cigarette and says he has plans to be with a certain girl. She blushes and asks if the girl is pretty. The protagonist replies that in all his years, he's never met a girl like her. She asks him what will happen if the girl rejects him, and Chen replies that he doesn't plan on giving up. Xiao asks if the protagonist is interested in the girl's parents' opinions, but he says he's only interested in her, the girl's own opinion. The girl blushes and her eyes widen, clearly embarrassed. She suddenly runs off and tells the protagonist that she needs time to think. Chen scratches the back of his head, clearly surprised by her sudden change of mood. The professor stands still and wonders why Xiao needs to think about it since he is talking about her. The next day, in the classroom, the professor greets the students and says that enough time has passed for the students to get to know each other and they can now choose a group leader. 1, he states that initiative is encouraged, so every student can run. The protagonist's friend asks him to run himself. 2, since she had already imagined her future, she was the first to announce her candidacy. And one of the protagonist's friends looks at her with displeasure. 3, thinking that he lost the opportunity, he gets up from his seat and the professor says it is necessary to greet the candidate. The students actively applaud the candidate, who introduces herself and says that many students may know her because she helped everyone with the application. She says that she is enthusiastic and will always help her classmates in their studies and in other matters, as well as ensure a better future for the group. The professor thanks her for her performance and applause is heard throughout the room. With especially active applause, the girl returns to her seat and the professor thanks her for her speech and waits for the next candidate to adopt the same spirit. Yu looks up and sees the protagonist walk by. Chen notices her gaze and turns his attention to her. Smiling slightly, he approaches and smiles confidently as the professor behind him watches with interest. A loud applause spreads throughout the audience in honor of the protagonist. His roommates actively support him and wish him luck. He starts his speech with a little joke, and the professor notices how he calmed the audience down. Then, the protagonist promises that he will communicate with every professor before the exam, thus helping the students and fighting for their scholarships and assignments. He mentions that there is a big difference between their university and school, so they need to discipline themselves. Yu listens to his speech very attentively, especially when he mentions that he will provide them with a good future if they choose him as their leader. Finally, the protagonist says that the students can vote for him if they believe him. The professor notes that the protagonist has many advantages, such as organizational and leadership skills. The man writes the voting results on the board, and the students cast their final vote for Chen. The professor announces, according to the voting results, that with 27 points, the protagonist becomes the leader. Chen thanks everyone for the votes, while his companions praise him. Meanwhile, Hulk reminds Yu that men are very unreliable and that she should not forget that. The girl, disappointed, walks through the university campus, thinking that everything has lost its meaning. Suddenly, the protagonist calls out his opponent's name, Yu. Unsatisfied, she expects him to show off his new position. Chen states that he wants to invite her to dinner because they need to talk. The girl blushes with embarrassment and misunderstanding. Then she asks him if he decided to become the leader to make her fall in love with him. The protagonist replies that he just wanted to discuss the details of running the class with the girl. To prove his intentions, he offers to let the girl bring her friend along. Yu blushes in front of the protagonist, while he says that he invited them to discuss something important. Hulk states that he shouldn't expect any blessings from her or her friend. The girl recalls that a few days earlier, he invited the guy to dinner but ignored the girls. Hulk gets up from her seat and goes to get food. Yu feels embarrassed sitting in front of the protagonist, but she doesn't say anything. The young man carefully observes the girl in front of him, as if remembering the details. He notes to himself her physical qualities and beauty. Finally, Yu decides to look at him, but she doesn't stop blushing for a second. Chen smiles at the eye contact, and his grin widens as the girl burns with embarrassment. Hulk returns to the table with a tray full of food and tells the protagonist the cost of the dishes. They start their meal, and the girl asks Chen what he wants from her, and what the point of their meeting is. The protagonist says he has something important to do with her, then declares that he wants to give her the leader position. Chen Yu, in disbelief, asks if the protagonist will really transfer the position to her, questioning if he's losing his mind. Chen affirms that he's fine, but he wants to know why she wants to be the leader. He's interested in her motives. The girl, after thinking for a moment, answers that she wants to help the students, but the protagonist doesn't believe her. Yu, strangely, averts her gaze as if she's been caught red-handed and says she wants to become a public official in the future, so she needs the experience of a leader, as it's valuable for that kind of job. The protagonist understands her motives and gets that she needs a career, while the girl can't understand why he's asking her these questions and what his real goals are. He states that he is only interested in money, and the girl tells him that she doesn't have any connections. He replies that thanks to this position, his influence would increase. And the girl points out that this is an excellent tool to achieve his goal. When Chen asks if their opinions align, the girl tries to say no. Meanwhile, Yu eats in silence and listens to their conversation. The protagonist states that he only needs this position for 1 year because he isn't interested in being a leader. Yu is very embarrassed by this situation, so she thanks him for the meal and wants to leave. But Chen tells her in an arrogant tone to get back in her seat. This causes the girl to panic. Hulk starts to actively defend her. The protagonist pushes a plate of peeled shrimp toward the girl and says he bought it especially for her. The girl is surprised, but Chen asks her to finish it and points to the plate with his hand. The girl, in a panic, says he doesn't have to do that for her. Hulk observes this whole situation with confusion, while the protagonist asks why Yu is refusing to eat the shrimp. Yu is really disgusted and can't understand what's happening. Chen looks at her shamelessly, and a certain resentment can be seen in his eyes. He leans toward her and takes her hand, in which she is holding a small cake. Then, the young man asks if it's really tasty and asks to try it. The girl is in shock. The protagonist tries the small cake and declares that it's not bad, but she still tries to say something. But she's interrupted by Yu's shout, who calls out to the protagonist, and he, not understanding the girl's reaction, comments that they still need to cooperate. At that moment, the young woman is furious, while her friend is burning with embarrassment. The protagonist, tilting his head slightly, reflects mentally he had always considered Yu the most beautiful of the group, but now he understands who truly stands out in beauty. Chen finds this evaluation strange and incomprehensible. Then the girl comments that few people know how to distinguish true appearance and beauty, so the protagonist must keep everything a secret since Yu is very shy and her friend fears she might run into ill-intentioned people. Chen agrees without hesitation, but asks them to stop staring at him so intensely when they talk about bad people. She responds mockingly that all men think the same way. The protagonist believes he has made a strategic move and decides to continue strengthening their relationships. After a brief pause, he proposes a deal. In the second year, he will give up the leader position. However, the girl questions what guarantees he can offer. Chen then presents his plan to her. During the first year, she will be able to gain everyone's trust, attract attention, and build a good image among teachers and students. Additionally, she will be able to join the advisory team, which will help her perform well on exams. She suspects he just wants to pass his dirty work onto her, but Chen convinces her that everything that belongs to him will eventually belong to her too. Curious, the girl asks what else he can promise her. With a confident smile, Chen replies that they can share the responsibilities. She will handle the minor matters while he will take care of the more important ones. Still skeptical, the girl questions what will happen if she rejects the deal he is so insistently offering. Chen responds pragmatically that in that case, he will work even harder so that she won't have a chance to lead, since universities rarely change leaders. Faced with this threat, the young woman is left speechless. The protagonist then softens his tone, assuring her that he will help her with all matters, but the girl, growing increasingly angry, says he is clearly lying and would never keep that promise. Showing her disdain, Chen, trying to use his charisma, rests his chin on his hand and claims that he has always been honest and sincere with everyone. Suddenly, the girl stands up abruptly from the table and declares that she accepts the deal. Then she tells her friend Yu that it's time to go. Yu murmurs a shy affirmation and they both leave. The protagonist, satisfied, mentally celebrates his success. His plan worked and he managed to convince her. Days later, in a red and white restaurant, the excited voices of the students echo through the hall, celebrating the end of military training. The students toast happily, while a wide variety of classic Chinese snacks fill the table. Da cheerfully encourages them to eat more and suggests they see each other more often since they study at nearby universities. However, the girl dismisses his concern. Meanwhile, the protagonist's best friend sits next to him with a dissatisfied expression. Chen notices him and asks what's wrong. His friend complains that at the finance university there are 62 students in his group, but only 2 girls. Surprised, the protagonist's eyes widen and he asks what those 2 girls are like. His friend, instead of answering, just keeps drinking in silence, as if he doesn't want to talk about the subject. Understanding his frustration, Chen pats him on the shoulder and encourages him to keep drinking without a care. Meanwhile, Xiao says that college should be focused on studies, not on relationships. But Sibo replies that if there are available girls in her major, she'd better just keep quiet. Then Gon calls Chen over to sit closer to Xiao and asks what he thinks of her as he reaches for the chopsticks. The protagonist accidentally touches Xiao's shoulder and, without hesitation, apologizes for it. Leaving Gon and Xiao completely surprised, Sibo ignores Gon's dissatisfied shouts and mentally notes that he wanted to act like Chen, without being considered shameless, at which point Xiao says they rarely meet, so they should definitely talk about their achievements. Down is planning to insult Chen, so he asks the young man to start talking about his achievements and successes first. The protagonist slowly lights a cigarette, waiting for a dramatic pause before giving his answer to his classmates. 2, he blows out the smoke and looks away, saying he's the class leader. Down is thrown into total shock, clearly not expecting that from the protagonist, and looks at him in great surprise. 3, Chen's best friend doesn't believe him either and shouts that the protagonist is definitely lying. Down tries to accuse the protagonist of being dishonest and says that someone like him could definitely not become the group leader. The attention shifts from the protagonist to his best friend, and they ask him about his university. He mentions that his school's infrastructure isn't bad. There's even a restaurant there that they could all go to together in the future. Meanwhile, Chen smokes in silence, thinking that his classmates are just a bunch of sentimental kids pretending to be serious adults. Down thinks about how he spent all night writing about the advantages of his university, hoping that Xiao will transfer there, at which point they finally ask him about his university. But someone interrupts him and calls out to the protagonist, telling him that after classes start, they'll be offered various activities and asking what kind of payment he'll get as the leader. The protagonist tells his classmates he needs to leave to take care of some business. He then approaches and tells her that he gets 50 per person. And although she hesitates, thinking it's too expensive, he claims that everything is fine. Chen looks at the girl and asks her to give that 50 to her friend, Yu. The girl looks at him with hero worship, and he directs her toward his classmates who are sitting in a cafe waiting for him. Hulk notices that Xiao is looking at Chen and immediately understands what's going on. She looks back at the protagonist and takes the money from him, then says she hopes the boss is pleased. The protagonist is surprised by her behavior and change in mood. Xiao gets up from the table, obviously proud, and once again asks the protagonist if he really is a leader. Down tries to belittle Chen, saying that leaders are just servants and are a far cry from being members of the student council, which he is about to join. He doesn't react to the attempted offense and says he thinks the exact same thing as Gon Sibo, then asks about his new love interest. And Chen, perplexed, asks him when he got drunk. His friend keeps whispering to him that, in his opinion, the protagonist is trying to get Yu's attention. but the protagonist asks him to be quiet as the classmates start saying goodbye to each other. And then they head to a nearby station together. On the station building, there are enormous inscriptions made in golden hieroglyphs. The protagonist is about to leave the station when, suddenly, Xiao calls out to him, clearly wanting to say something. She looks down as if gathering her thoughts before speaking her mind. After a moment, she turns her gaze towards the protagonist. She gathers her confidence and prepares to express her thoughts. She shouts loudly for the whole street to hear that she appreciates Chen's persistence for her, which attracts the attention of all the passers-by. Such a loud declaration bothers the young man, who seems to not want to hear anymore. After a while, the protagonist lights another cigar and sits on a bench looking darker than a cloud. The young man feels like a scoundrel for letting Xiao think he still has feelings for her. After a few minutes, the young man arrives at a street near several multi-story buildings. He approaches the office building and says he's already near Senton Express. The young man observes the warehouse workers and notices there's no dress code here. All the workers dress however they want, so he decides to take matters into his own hands, approaching a worker and handing him a cigar. Chen asks him if the establishment's director is there. The guy takes the cigar and replies that Director John is on the second floor. The protagonist thanks him and goes up to the second floor. He enters the director's office and sees the man sitting at his desk writing something on a paper. At first, he doesn't notice the young man. When the director turns his attention to the newcomer, he asks who he is. Chen pulls out a sheet showing the job opening and says he saw a part-time job offer. The director asks where he's from, and the protagonist replies with the name of his university. The boss replies that someone has already come from his university, then tells the young man he can just go back to school. The protagonist hears this but doesn't want to give up. He asks the boss what he needs to do to replace this employee and get his position. The company director thinks about the guy's proposal for a few seconds and questions if the guy really wants to go through with it. Chen thinks the man's reaction is a bad sign, so he says he sees nothing wrong with wanting to take a job because he just wants to earn money. The director finds the protagonist a bit strange, so he points out that by looking at his clothes, you can tell he lives very well. So why does the protagonist need money? The protagonist says this isn't a big office and that it makes no sense to review the entire process for each employee. The director replies that even though the protagonist is very persistent, he can't just replace one employee with another. The director comments that the company is doing well now and is delivering many packages. Chen replies, that's why they have no desire to change agents. The boss says that if he increases the number of daily referrals to 100, the young man will get the job. The protagonist thinks it's a good offer and asks the director if he has a business card. The boss takes his card and holds it out to the protagonist. He takes it from the man's hands, opens the doors, and leaves. The director goes back to his documents and says that this kid is interesting. Meanwhile, other things are happening on the city streets. Voices can be heard inviting residents to join the club. Chen walks down the street and thinks that in the future he will have to work with rich people and many businesses. So he figures that in college, the easiest way to get known is to join some kind of club or student union. At that moment, the young man is in a long line at the Student Relations Department office. One of the students notices the young man and asks if he came to join the student association. He smiles hesitantly and says that for his group to have a good future, someone needs to join there. Hearing this, the girls look at each other and don't know what to say. They hold hands and say they are going to check out other places because they are friends and it's not good to compete with each other. The protagonist says he'll pay for their coffee tomorrow, then they say goodbye amicably. In line, a guy notices Chen and is clearly not happy. The protagonist notices the guy's negative reaction and can't understand what caused it. The guy walks away without saying anything, still scowling. Soon, Chen gets an invitation from the committee to come in. He enters the office and stands in front of 3 people. The protagonist realizes that the guy who was scowling at him is one of the judges in the office. They look at each other and the guy watches the young man with obvious hostility. The protagonist politely introduces himself and tells the committee members his name, but is interrupted mid-sentence. The guy who dislikes him says that he doesn't need to introduce himself, since they only recruit girls. Chen feels dissatisfied at being shut down and starts to get angry at the selection committee. The girl on the committee whispers to the guy that she doesn't remember those conditions for club recruitment. He replies that he'll explain it to her later. Then he tells Chen that their committee handles matters related to business and sponsors, so he believes girls are better suited for this and that Chen should leave and not waste the team's time. The girl nearby comments that they had chosen a guy until recently, so she's confused to hear they only accept girls. The protagonist starts to get furious and asks the guy if that's really what everyone needs. The man is surprised by the young man's reaction, and a conflict begins between them. The audience is surprised and starts to watch the commotion between the two closely. The guy on the committee starts to get enraged and says that every year the freshmen get harder to keep in line. The girl next to him asks the young man to calm down, and the protagonist replies that he is completely calm, but he wants to speak to the person in charge. The committee is surprised by this statement. The protagonist approaches the guy and starts to say that this is a strange form of gender discrimination. The guy replies that connections are better maintained by girls. Chen says that the most important thing is the proper completion of the task, not the gender of the worker. He also says that if only girls are needed. So, what is this guy doing here? The people around him support Chen and tell the guy to leave. Suddenly, a man appears behind them and says it's time for them to stop this farce. The protagonist turns around and looks at the newcomer. He doesn't recognize him and asks who he is. The man introduces himself as Suzhou and says he is the vice president of the student union. He enters the office and says that if there's a problem, he can call security. The protagonist calmly replies to the vice president that, in that case, it's time for him to leave. Su, surprised, asks where Chen would go. He replies that he can call the security guard himself. Su doesn't know how to respond to such audacity and asks which group the protagonist belongs to and who his advisor is. Chen replies that he is the leader of the second group and offers to give him his number. The vice president is surprised by such audacity from the freshman in his speech. Then, the girls enter the office and defend the protagonist. The girl from the committee approaches the protagonist and asks him not to fight. She tells him that he has already passed the interview and now he just has to wait for the result. The protagonist calms down and smiles at the girl, saying that in this case, there's no need to worry. The guy from the committee starts to complain about the protagonist's behavior, his arrogance, and contempt for the club. Chen replies that there is no clause in the rules that prohibits freshmen from joining the club. The audience sides with the protagonist and says that if he can participate, why are the judges stopping him? The vice president says that all the responsibility is his and asks the protagonist if he could guarantee sponsorship. Chen questions if the man can always guarantee sponsorship, to which Joe responds affirmatively. The protagonist says that in that case, he can also handle it easily, which provokes an outraged reaction from the vice president. The audience sides with the protagonist and says it's time to give freshmen a chance to join regardless of their gender. Sword says that they could use some help from the freshmen and that he thinks he can give the protagonist a chance to prove his worth. So the vice president wants to compare who among them will be able to get more sponsors in total. The girl next to them says that Joe has a better chance because he has 1 year of experience working in the student ministry. The vice president asks if the protagonist wants to participate. Chen asks confidently, what will happen if he wins and raises more money from sponsorship? Joe replies that in that case, he could be the president of the committee. The protagonist gladly accepts, and the guy is surprised by this because he didn't expect such a response. Chen points to the people nearby and says that there are many witnesses here, so Joe won't be able to back out of his promise. At that moment, the rules are given. First, one person is randomly selected to calculate the amount of sponsorship. Whoever gathers more sponsors will win. They are asked if everything is clear regarding the rules. The protagonist's rival responds affirmatively. The protagonist is not sure how reliable the system of randomly selecting a single person is, but he accepted the conditions. The opponent is assigned the location of a hair salon, and Chen has gotten a nearby stationery shop. The opponent starts to walk away from them and confidently says they will see who will win here. The rest of the audience watches from a distance as the guy communicates with the hair salon's management. Yang tells the hero that the hair salon opened recently, but the stationery shop has been in business for a long time. Chen tells him not to worry. The protagonist's rival returns and happily says that he has collected 200 in sponsorship fees and a 300 Joan coupon. The protagonist is unimpressed and throws away his cigarette. He walks away from the opponent and heads towards the crowd of students. A girl approaches him and offers to help. She tells him that she will start with him, since the young man is just a freshman. She enters the shop and greets the owner, apologizing for bothering him. Then she starts to explain that the club is collecting sponsorships for the university. The owner, with a sudden and swift movement, slams a book on the table. He says loudly that he already has a lot of debt and therefore can't sponsor anything. The girl says that he grabs this book every time they ask him for sponsorship. The protagonist thinks that it's hard for people to make money. The shopkeeper shows them the book and says that if the students help manage his debts, he can sponsor them. The girl feels annoyed because she is sure they won't be able to get anything from this man. The club members look at Chen, confident that he will lose the competition. Suddenly, the protagonist turns to the shop owner and tells him that he can help him resolve his debts. The shopkeeper is surprised by what he heard, as he didn't expect such an offer from the student. The shop owner agrees to these conditions, and Chen says he will figure everything out before the second half of the day. The shopkeeper instructs him to go to the shop across the street, where there is a middle-aged man with a threatening appearance, holding a large knife in one hand and a watermelon in the other. The girls get scared by his appearance and even mistake him for a butcher instead of a fruit seller. The rivals are pleased with the girls' reaction. They think that they will be afraid to go there and, therefore, they will lose the competition. The scene takes place near a fruit stand in the market. Chen is in front of a menacing fruit seller's shop. The seller raises his huge knife over the fruit, making him look intimidating. With a powerful strike, he cuts the watermelon into 2 equal parts with a loud sound. Chen's friends don't like this. But the protagonist doesn't react, and his friends start to convince him that the debt isn't that important. They believe this seller is not very open to communication. The protagonist tells them that if they are scared, he can go alone. They are surprised by this statement. The protagonist's rival asks the vice president if he should win, but the man doesn't answer. The protagonist approaches the shop owner. The man looks at him while wiping the knife with a cloth. He then asks the protagonist and the 2 friends behind him what they need. Chen smiles politely and tells the owner that he doesn't need fruit. What he needs is money. Upon hearing this, the seller gives him a nasty look. Then he delivers another powerful blow and cuts the watermelon into 4 pieces. A loud bang is heard as the knife hits the wood. The owner looks at them and asks again what kind of money they are talking about. The watermelon juice on his knife looks like something else, which makes him look even more threatening. Chen's friends are even more scared of this man, but despite this, the protagonist remains calm, takes a small piece of watermelon from the vendor's table, and starts eating it. Chen, calm and confident, tells the man that he came from the office supply store across the street. He says that the guy owes the store owner $3,500 and hasn't paid it yet. The store owner is surprised by the protagonist's courage and shamelessness. He finds it strange that he isn't afraid, so he asks him when he hired the protagonist. Chen replies that he shouldn't worry about that and again asks about the money. The vendor says that he doesn't owe $35,000. Chen replies that's what he heard. Then the vendor turns his attention to the protagonist's friends and asks them what kind of people they are. The protagonist smiles and says that they are his classmates and that if he doesn't pay the debt, they will have to take the necessary amount of fruit from him. The owner gets furious upon hearing such a threat and yells at Chen, asking him how he dares to do that. Then, the man goes to the back room and takes a paper that proves he only owes $25,000 to the owner of the office supply store. The protagonist agrees with the mentioned amount, and then the vendor tells him to return the receipt. Since he apparently misheard and that the vendor only owes $25,000, the protagonist says that he now has material proof of the debt and asks the store owner to pay him. The man yells at him, and the rest of the students support the protagonist, telling the man to pay the debt. The man starts yelling at them and asks what will happen if he doesn't pay his debt. A police officer approaches upon seeing the crowd gathered around the store, trying to understand why so many people have gathered there. The officer addresses the store owner and tells him to stop disturbing the other businesses and to disperse the crowd. The vendor says everything will be resolved right there. He gets even more irritated with the protagonist, but Chen just stands there smiling politely. The protagonist and his friends arrive at the office supply store and hand over the necessary amount to the store owner. The owner says he never thought the money would come back to him and thanks Chen and his friends. He reaches out to take the wad of cash, but the protagonist stops him. The owner asks what the problem is, and the protagonist replies that, according to the contract, that money belongs to him since he recovered it from the dead. The owner complains that the amount is too much and only offers 500 yuan. The students say they had agreed on something different and that the owner has to accept, albeit reluctantly, what they are saying. Finally, the protagonist receives the sponsorship money and happily looks at his rivals in the competition and hands the money to the girl, telling her he received 500 yuan from the owner. She is surprised by this, and the rivals stand behind them, watching what is happening with dissatisfied faces. The protagonist looks at them confidently and asks the girl what that was all about. She glares at him with displeasure for a few seconds, but doesn't say anything and takes the money from his hand. Voices from all around congratulate the protagonist on his victory. A while later, the club members start to leave, clearly upset by what just happened. The students shout behind them that according to the plan, they must give up the president's seat. Chen thinks they won't do it and tells his friends they're going to get a drink. His friends are happy about this, and the rivals leave the building. The students are outraged that the club members have ignored their promise. They think they aren't going to give up. The protagonist looks at the man and thinks that the president can't afford to lose authority in front of the other students. It was already nighttime, and the protagonist was in the building with the rest of the students. They were playing cards, and one of them shouted that he had gathered 4 kings and that the victory was his. Jan slaps the protagonist, who complains that Jan attacked him again during a card game. Then another student shouts the news that Jackie and Sue got into a fight. Jackie and the protagonist are surprised. Jackie says that Sue isn't that type of person. The protagonist asks where the 2 people who fought in the dorm are. After a while, a large crowd is near them, and they are discussing what is happening. They think the 2 guys are drinking. Yan and Chen approach the crowd. The young man doesn't like what is happening, nor the fact that the problems never end. Then the students hear a voice near them. One of the teachers wants to get through the crowd, and one of the guys who fought is covered in scratches and bruises. Suddenly, the protagonist enters the room. He turns to Professor Gon and tells him that he was just about to meet with him. The professor looks at them sternly and asks the protagonist if he knows what happened there. The protagonist looks at the guys who fought and starts to think about the reasons for the fight. Chen assumes that something will be made up to involve him in the fight, since it's a confrontation between 2 club members. And the protagonist could be made the culprit, which could lead to his expulsion. Chen doesn't know what to do and believes that the current situation could greatly damage his reputation. He thinks that this fight and its solution are a complex and difficult task. The professor tells the protagonist to stop being silent and to say what he knows about what happened. Jackie, hesitantly, starts to try and take the blame, but he is interrupted. The protagonist doesn't let him finish and claims that he knows what happened there. Even though this isn't true, Jackie is very surprised by this. The professor says that the leader shouldn't participate in such fights and asks him to write a written explanation. Chen promises to do it that same afternoon. The professor says that after the explanation, he will have to apologize to Sue. And shortly after, he will be punished for what happened. The young man apologizes to Sue, and the man frowns upon seeing Chen. The doctor approaches Sue and begins to check him over, touching his wounds and asking him where it hurts. The teachers look at each other. The doctor states that everything is fine and that it's not necessary to prescribe medication or treatment. They begin to disperse. The curious students comment that it's time to go to their rooms to sleep. The protagonist tells Jackie to drop it and go back to his room. The boy looks upset but agrees, turning to leave. At that moment, only 2 people are left in the room, the protagonist and Sue. There's tension in the air. Sue starts the conversation, first telling the protagonist to stop pretending to be a nice person. Chen doesn't answer at first, but then he turns to the guy and tells him he only did it because he's a university student. Otherwise, he wouldn't have helped him, even if the guy's life depended on it. Sue is surprised by what he hears. Then Chen turns around and starts to leave the room with his hands in his pockets. The students in the hallway look at him curiously. Jackie, upon seeing him, starts to apologize. The guy tells him he didn't want things to be like this between them. The protagonist, instead of answering, kicks him hard in the leg, and Jackie falls to the ground. His friends ask if Jackie is okay, and he replies that he deserved the hit. The doubtful students reassure the guy and tell him that the leader will forgive him. Jackie just sits in silence, clearly very upset about what happened. Meanwhile, the teachers are talking on the street. One of them says he didn't expect Chen to take the blame for something he didn't do. The other agrees and says that the leader is very helpful. Down talks about the student council. He thinks their class leader is too impulsive. The teacher says that Sue is smart and decided to take a risk this time to show that no one else deserves his position. Down smokes a cigarette on the street and agrees with the teacher's words. But he wonders what will happen to his student. The other replies that he doesn't want to worry him, so he doesn't say anything. Meanwhile, the students gather at the spot to discuss today's incident. The protagonist is sitting in a chair with his back to the others and doesn't say a word. Jackie apologizes to him and says he lost his temper because of the drink. Other students support him and say that he has already admitted his guilt. The protagonist hands him a cigarette, and Jackie, seeing this, is happy, takes the cigarette from the protagonist's hands and starts to talk. But he is interrupted by Chen, who says the incident wasn't useless. The students are surprised by this. He smokes and tells the others that after today, the guy will no longer be able to be vice president. The next day, the action takes place at a university club. The members gather in the office and invite Chen. Afterward, they ask him if he is ready to take the position of vice president of public relations for the club. The protagonist responds positively. He says he won't let them down and will live up to their expectations. They say that after Sue recently resigned, a vacancy opened up and they decided to accept the protagonist. They inform him that he will take over the position after the vacation period ends. Chen thanks them, but Sue is not happy with what is happening, says nothing, and starts to leave the office. Then he turns to the rest of the club members and says that the protagonist is not as simple as he seems at first glance. Then he adds that they will regret accepting Chen for the vacant position. The protagonist asks if the guy wants to say anything else about him. The man says he doesn't want to say anything else and warns that they will meet again. The protagonist starts to leave the club office. After a while, the guy from the club thinks it's a way of saying thank you. The girl says she was invited to support the protagonist's candidacy and that she can't let him down. Some events unfold on the 1st of October during a national holiday. There's a crowd of students on the street, and the protagonist says the girl's father shouldn't have met up with him. Xiao replies that in that case, she'll have to take the bus. They hear the driver say it's time to get going. The car has 7 seats and belongs to Xiao's father. Down says that Chen needs to act maturely considering his age. Chen is tired of it. The driver tells them to get in the car and put their luggage and belongings in the back. Xiao sits in the passenger seat and there's only one empty seat left next to her. Down is happy he can sit next to her. He opens the door and gets ready to get in the car, but the protagonist tells him to let him pass because he wants to sit in the back seat of the car. Down lets him pass and thinks everything is going well, so he looks at the hero and sees that he didn't sit in the back seat, but next to the girl. Down asks him if the young man didn't want to sit in the back, but Chen replies that he changed his mind. Then, the student is called and told to get in the car. He's annoyed by the protagonist's trick, but he finally sits inside the car, which is getting ready to head out. Down complains about the protagonist's behavior, saying he'll never take his words seriously. At that moment, the driver instructs the students to put on their seatbelts. Down, in the back seat, tries to start a conversation with the girl. He asks her what club she joined. Xiao says she still doesn't know where to go because she has many options in front of her. Down starts to brag and says he joined the advertising club, and now he doesn't have to worry about anything. Sibo comments that he wanted to join the club, but he wasn't accepted. The girl replies that she'd like to join the student council. Then they ask about Chen's club, the protagonist. He replies that he is the vice president of public relations for the student union. They reply that he's already the leader of his group at the university and wonder where else he could try. Gon doesn't believe the protagonist has become the vice president of the student council. The driver overhears the conversation and thinks that he's sure the protagonist has really taken the position, judging by his experience with him. Suddenly, Gon starts saying that a freshman couldn't take such a position, that for that, he would have to be too excellent. He asks for Chen's opinion, but he ignores the question and says he doesn't want to talk about such nonsense. After a while, the car stops on the street, the sound of brakes is heard, and everyone gets out of the car. The driver says this is where they part ways, as he still has business to attend to. Then the car starts and drives away from them. The girl says she still has a lot of luggage. Gon offers to help her carry it. She notices that something isn't right with the protagonist and asks if he can help her. The protagonist looks at her without any visible reaction. Down, upon hearing this, says he can help the girl carry the bags himself, but Sibo stops him. The guy is disgusted that he can't stay with the girl and help her. This opportunity was for the protagonist. The protagonist thinks he could have arrived earlier to avoid carrying other people's things. But Sibo wanted to save money on the train ticket, and that's why he came with the girl. After a while, he's carrying Xiao's bags. She runs ahead and starts eating a candy on a stick, then offers it to the protagonist, but he refuses. Shortly after, he decides to eat and the girl gets closer, handing the candy directly to his mouth. This catches him by surprise, but he starts to eat. For a while, they don't say anything. She starts to tell a story about something that happened recently, but is interrupted. The protagonist looks deep into the crowd and sees that his father is there. The man is watching him. Perplexed by the embarrassing scene between Chen and the girl still hasn't noticed him. And the protagonist starts thinking about how to get out of this situation. In the afternoon, the protagonist arrives at the pool club to hang out and relax. He stands near the table with a cue in his hands. His friend says he didn't expect them to find such cool places in the city. Then, he notices two attractive girls coming up the stairs next to them. They talk about yesterday. When the protagonist saw his father, Chen comments that his father remains silent. He also says that his father knows what happened. They continue playing pool, and the protagonist, after a shot, says it's his turn to shoot. Sibo notices that the nearby girls are dressed very lightly and asks the protagonist if they aren't cold in this temperature. The protagonist assumes they're already used to it, so he sits in a nearby chair and takes out a cigarette, starting to smoke, releasing clouds of smoke from his mouth. While he's smoking, one of the girls approaches him and invites him to have a drink with her. The protagonist points to Sibo and tells her she should go with him instead, because he doesn't have a girlfriend. The girl takes his advice and approaches Sibo, asking him how old he is. Sibo starts to stutter. Night falls on the street and the moon is visible in the sky. They leave the club and his friend starts complaining that they left alone. At 10 o'clock at night, Chen takes a cigarette and starts to smoke. The protagonist starts talking about what he did on campus, but suddenly he freezes. His friend starts to ask what they were doing on campus, but the protagonist doesn't answer him. They both notice someone next to him and look in that direction, falling silent together. There are two girls there looking at them in surprise. The friend tells the protagonist to run away, but he replies that it's too late to escape and they've already been seen. The protagonist thinks that since he and Xiao are not in a relationship, there's nothing wrong with going to a club. The young man smiles, saying that the party is over and that his house is in the other direction. Xiao gets angry and says that he said he was going to his grandmother's house. The protagonist doesn't know how to respond and just looks at the girl. Seo's friend mentions that they talked and that the girl wanted to go out with the protagonist. Seo interrupts her friend and crouches down, placing the cup she was holding on the ground. She tells her friend to leave and they start walking away in silence. The friend starts to say that a new drink recently appeared in the store and that Xiao bought it for him. The woman blames him for the places he visits and calls him a scoundrel. The protagonist doesn't understand what's wrong with this and thinks he didn't do anything wrong. The protagonist's friend tells him to talk to the girl. Chen feels bad about what happened and knows he could lose his girlfriend this way. The fruit drink that Xiao left spills on the floor. A little later, the protagonist decides to call Xiao's father. He goes to the payphone and dials her number. The father answers the phone, and Chen asks him to pass the phone to Xiao. The father looks at the girl's bedroom door, but she doesn't answer the call. So her father assumes she's already asleep and tells Chen that the girl is resting and that he should call her tomorrow. Chen silently hangs up the phone and goes back home. The next morning, he starts calling Xiao's house again, and her father answers the phone. The young man asks him to pass the phone to the girl, but the father tells him she left the house a while ago. A little later, he calls the same place again. The father answers again and asks who is calling. Xiao is sitting next to him on the sofa, but she doesn't take the phone from her father. The protagonist says he wants to talk to the girl, but he is told that she hasn't returned home yet. Although this isn't true, Chen tells the girl's father to tell her that he is returning to the university today. The father whispers to the girl that the protagonist is returning today, but she doesn't react to this and continues to sit on the sofa with a frown. Xiao ignores all of her father's attempts to talk. He is annoyed by this and looks at her, not knowing what to say in this situation. He asks the girl what the reason for the fight between them was and what happened the day before. She doesn't answer and continues to stare silently at the floor. It's clear that she is upset about what is happening. Chen hangs up the payphone and starts to leave. He doesn't know what to do about his relationship with Xiao. The father says that the mother will be back soon, and he thinks she will ask questions when she sees her daughter's condition. Instead of answering, the girl gets up from the sofa and says she's going to take a shower. The father decides to ask if she and Chen are in love with each other. She responds aggressively and bluntly that they are not in love, that they never have been. The protagonist is already at home, packing his things to return to the university. The mother complains that until recently she was raising her son, but now he is leaving so heartlessly. The protagonist replies that he can't do anything about it, since he is a leader. The mother takes some money and gives it to him, but the young man tells her he doesn't need money. She asks him how it's possible that he doesn't need it, and Chen replies that he recently won 2,500. Then he starts to leave the house, telling his parents to take care of their health and not to argue with each other. The mother watches him, not knowing what to say. He closes the door behind him, leaving his parents alone. The mother asks her husband if they have gotten old. The father asks her why she thinks that, and she replies that it seems Chen now has his own world in which he doesn't take money and doesn't need them at all. The father thinks this is a good thing, because that way they will worry less about him. But the mother thinks this is wrong and asks him if her husband's colleagues have daughters of a suitable age for Chen. The father remembers seeing his son and the girl Xiao on the street like a couple. He tells his wife that probably his colleagues do have daughters of the right age. Meanwhile, the man continues to remember the scene between Chen and the girl. Outside, it's pouring rain and the sky is filled with clouds and thunder. The protagonist walks through the downpour without an umbrella. The young man thinks about how unlucky it was for it to rain right after he left his parents' house. In the distance, the protagonist sees a girl standing in the rain, getting soaked. He recognizes her, and the girl sees him too. Yu is surprised to see him there, and Chen starts walking towards her. As he walks, he pulls an umbrella out of his backpack. Yu feels embarrassed around him and blushes a little because she remembers their last encounter, which was very strange. The girl remembers the embarrassing situation and feels very awkward in his presence. Chen looks at her, which makes her feel even more uncomfortable. Yu starts to leave, but he stops her, telling her to wait. 2, the protagonist approaches, saying he's not going to eat her and that there's no reason for her to run away from him. 3, they look at each other, and the atmosphere is very awkward. 4, at that moment, the young man invites her to have dinner with him that night. The girl doesn't answer, and he says that they're classmates. Besides, he tells her he's not feeling very well today. Yu asks what he wants to eat, and the protagonist says there's a new dish at the cafeteria. When asked about the price, he replies that it costs 50 yuan. Then they decide to walk towards the dorm, and the girl starts insisting that the boy walk faster. They step into the rain, and she starts running quickly. The protagonist continues to walk calmly, and she disappears from his sight, saying she's going to get changed. She's carrying the young man's umbrella, and he asks her where hers is. Then Yu comes back and replies that she gave it to Hulk so he wouldn't get wet. Chen is surprised and asks the girl if she doesn't need it herself to stay dry. She says everything is fine, and the young man thinks that this girl is very innocent. So they start walking together. Chen tells her to stay under the umbrella so she doesn't get wet. Finally, after a few minutes of walking, they arrive at the cafeteria. They order shrimp and lamb for 2 people, which costs a total of 53 yuan. The girl hands the money to the cashier, and then they start looking for a place to sit in the dining hall. Chen asks her if she went to the dormitory to get money, and she says yes. He looks at her, perplexed, but doesn't say anything. They sit at the table and silently begin to eat their portions with chopsticks. The protagonist eats and watches the girl, asking her if she's hungry. He asks this because she's just holding the food with her chopsticks and not doing anything else. Her face darkens and she gets upset upon hearing his question, and she looks sad. And Chen says that this dish costs more than the price of lodging and asks if she's not going to eat it. She says she still has 100 yuan saved, plus she'll earn some money organizing books in the library. She says she can save money and eat at a cafe. Chen asks if she blames him for spending her money on food, and she replies that she doesn't. The young man watches her curiously, but doesn't say anything to her directly. After a while, the protagonist gathers his courage and tells her that in that case, she should become his girlfriend. This surprises her, and the girl ends up knocking over her bowl of rice. There's an awkward silence between them. Yu starts to feel embarrassed and blushes. She doesn't know how to respond to such a weird proposal, then says she only ate a few bites and asks the protagonist not to force her to eat. The protagonist is surprised by her reaction, but agrees and changes the topic of conversation to something different. She looks at the rice scattered on the table and says she doesn't like forcing people to do things. Yu remembers how Hulk convinced her to let Chen take the lead. Then, her friend advises her to avoid him if she doesn't like it. Yu looks at the protagonist, but can't find anything to say. She's very embarrassed by what's happening in the dining hall, so the girl decides it's time to leave. The protagonist agrees, since he has also eaten, and tells her he needs to grab an umbrella as the cafeteria is near his dorm. He also tells her to take the rest of the food from the cafeteria home. He walks away from her. Yu looks at the protagonist with uncertainty, but doesn't say anything. Then, the girl looks down and notices something on the table next to her. It turns out to be a white envelope that the protagonist didn't take. She says that he didn't take the envelope, but Chen had already left the room. Yu picks up the envelope with her hands and looks at it. The next day, the protagonist tells the professor that when he was visiting his parents, he brought 2 geese to cook. The professor thanks him and says he wants to invite him over. Chen replies that the professor is too kind. Go tells his daughter that the protagonist is there. The little girl jumps into his arms and says he has finally arrived. Chen replies that he came here to see her. She takes his hand and says she knows what Pix's coat means. Go doesn't understand what she's talking about. The protagonist thinks that next time he needs to give the girl something and says out loud that she should tell everyone what she discovered. Suddenly, the woman's voice is heard from the kitchen saying that the food is ready and that dinner can begin. The protagonist turns to the professor and says he will go to the kitchen first. Go tells the protagonist that there's a girl in his room named Yu. He then asks if he knows her. The protagonist confirms, and the professor starts talking about her, saying that she has family problems and that she asked for help to get a scholarship and get into the university. It turns out that Hulk helped her, but now she's in trouble. The professor asks the protagonist if he can take care of this matter. Chen didn't answer the professor and just showed a surprised expression on his face. The professor asked him if he had any questions, and the protagonist replied that he had no questions. Other events unfold. October 8th, in the university building, Chen is sitting with his friends in class. Yang complains about how hard it is to come back after the holidays. Chen says that he's tired too. Suddenly, Hyuga appears and asks to speak with him. She pulls him away from the rest of the students so their conversation won't be overheard by anyone. Then, she pulls a white envelope from her pocket and shows it to the protagonist. Angrily, she asks him what that means. The protagonist looks at the envelope and wonders how the letter ended up in her possession. He says that these things shouldn't be discussed here because the students might not understand everything correctly. Hulk says that Yu asked her to return that letter. The protagonist asks if Yu opened the envelope. Hulk replies that Yu didn't open it, but she did. The protagonist asks what she wants from him since she opened a letter that wasn't for her. Hulk says that he doesn't need to pursue Yu and warns him that there are other girls he can fall in love with. The protagonist asks if he caused any harm to Yu. The girl says she gave her 500 yen and that she might offend her if she opened the envelope. The protagonist raises his hand and says that in any case, he doesn't want to cause any harm to Yu. The girl doesn't believe his words, but then she starts to think that everyone believes and trusts him, so this means he behaves decently. Suddenly, the young man lights a cigarette and starts smoking. The girl moves away from the boy. He reveals that he's not in love with anyone, and then she says she knows that Hugo is single and has some friends to introduce him to. Hugo gets angry with him and is about to leave, but halfway there, he turns around and looks at him. The girl says that girls feel disconnected from boys. They often feel they need to get closer to them. Chen thinks this is a good proposal, so the group will become friendlier and he will be able to communicate with Yu. He asks her what she's thinking. She says they could meet as a group and eat somewhere. Chen replies that that's too old-fashioned. He thinks they all need to bond somehow, but in a different way. The girl asks if he came up with something, and he replies that he'll tell her when he gets back to the dorm. She turns around and says she's leaving. He interrupts her and asks her to wait a little longer. Chen puts out his cigarette and says there's one more topic he wants to discuss with her. Hulk asks what it is. The young man replies that she applied for financial support for you, but didn't mention the problems with getting it approved. Hulk stutters, and the protagonist says they had already agreed that she would contact him when problems arose that she couldn't solve. He says that she has her own motivation and sense of dignity, but sometimes they need to be more practical, and he says he can fix it, and that he will go to the committee again to try to get help. The protagonist says he will go with her to deal with this situation, and she agrees. Later, Hulk meets with Yu and tells her that the professor told the protagonist everything, and that now he will take care of the problem. She feels embarrassed by this and doesn't know what to say. Suddenly, the girl notices a man at the door. It turns out to be the protagonist. He looks directly at her, which makes her feel even more embarrassed. She puts her head on the table and hides her face. After a while, they arrive at the professor's office. Hulk greets the professor and Yu, who is hiding behind her friend. The protagonist observes the professor's face and recognizes him as Ying. The man tells the girls they came in vain, since they still have to wait for the application to be approved. He says the data provided is not enough. Hulk asks how long the whole process will take. Ying replies that he doesn't know and that they will be notified when it's ready. The girl gets angry and says that she sent the documents before the holidays began and asks why it's still not ready. He replies that they have certain financial rules and that they should understand that. The three of them stand up and look at the professor. Ying goes quiet and doesn't look at them. The girl thinks that only Chen can solve the problem, so she tells the professor that he must understand the situation and that Yu constantly saves on food. Hulk says that Yu always works late at the library and that she's going to get a second job at the cafeteria to pay for food. She gets angry with him and tells him that they should consider these things in relation to the students. The professor remains silent and pays no attention to the angry girl's words. She realizes that he isn't reacting to her words, so she gets even angrier and can barely contain herself. The girl can't take it anymore and slams the table hard, asking what kind of professor is he. The professor opens a drawer in his desk, takes out a small item, applies the official stamp, and says that now the students bear full responsibility for this situation. The protagonist grabs the girl, and she tells him not to stop her from helping Yu. The protagonist tells the professor it's time for everyone to cool down and regroup. He pulls the furious girl out of the room, ignoring her protests. They go out onto the street in front of the building. The young man asks if she's calmed down yet. She complains that Yu met all the conditions and never received any help. Yu herself says they don't have to go there anymore, assuring them that everything is fine and she can manage without the financial support for students. Chen sits on the steps of a building and sighs loudly. He turns to Huck and asks for Yu's documents. The girl asks if he can handle it. The protagonist replies that he doesn't know if the idea will work, but he thinks it's at least worth a try. Huck believes nothing will come of it, since the professor doesn't even want to try to understand the situation. Chen believes the problem is something else. At that moment, he gets up from the steps and walks back towards the building. The protagonist returns to Professor Pink's office, states his name, and apologizes for the girl's behavior, saying that she didn't understand the situation. Pink agrees with him, but remains silent. Chen notices something in the office that catches his attention, so the young man goes to a cabinet and starts cleaning and putting things in order. The director watches this, but says nothing. Chen puts the books back in their place and arranges them neatly on the shelf. Then, he grabs a broom and starts sweeping the dust and debris from the office floor. The director wants to stop him, but the protagonist just smiles politely. Next, he takes a rag and starts cleaning the floor. Pink works silently this whole time, and Chen then makes hot coffee for the director while he fills out papers at his desk. While Chen is doing the chores, the morning passes and noon arrives. The director gets up from his desk and says he's going to eat during his break. The protagonist agrees and leaves the office with him into the hallway. After a short while, the protagonist returns to the director's office, greets him, and Pink asks if he shouldn't be in class. The protagonist replies that he doesn't have class this afternoon. The director tells him that he has cleaned well and can go back to the dorm, but Chen replies that he only washed the floor and didn't have time to clean the cabinet. The director thinks to himself that it doesn't matter how much time the young man spends trying to get help for Yu. It's now getting dark and it's 5:30. The protagonist and the director are still in the office. The director tells the protagonist that he's already cleaned the floor by the cabinet, so there's no need for him to come back the next day. Chen replies that he isn't finished yet, and that he only took care of the outside of the cabinet but hasn't cleaned the inside. The next morning, the protagonist continues to clean the director's office, and they don't communicate. On the third day, the situation repeats itself, and once again, they don't speak. On the fourth day, the protagonist is still cleaning. Finally, the director turns to him and asks for his name. Chen is cleaning the cabinet at that moment and introduces himself, saying that he's the leader of their group. The guy invites him to smoke and he accepts. The guy lights his cigarette and they start smoking together. The guys stand next to each other and just blow out clouds of smoke. Pink asks if things are really that bad for you financially. The protagonist replies that her parents passed away early and she lived with her grandmother. He says that Yu saves everything she can on food and only spends $50 during the month. The man listens to Chen and puts the cigarette in the ashtray, saying that he now understands the girl's situation. The protagonist keeps smoking and doesn't answer anymore. The events continue in the principal's office. The protagonist tells the principal that he sees documents here that can encourage students to start their own businesses. The principal replies that the university actually has very few resources for this, and all they can do for the students is free up classrooms. Pink says that nowadays, people start their own businesses to gain publicity. Then the man remembers something and starts searching the shelf on his desk. He grabs the documents and says that Chen doesn't need to come tomorrow. Then he tells him to give them to you and to fill out the documents. The protagonist is surprised, and the principal says that he spoke with Gon and confirmed the girl's financial situation. According to him, the documents must be submitted next week. Chen asks if the documents from U City are necessary, and the principal replies that they are not very important. The guy starts reading the documents, which are an application to request financial aid for low-income students. The protagonist is satisfied that he got it and can help the girl. The protagonist arrives at the room where his friends are gathered. They are bragging about which one of them helped him this week. All three of them helped him recently. And the protagonist agrees that their help is extremely important to him. The students support him, and the protagonist says they should organize events for the guys and girls in the group. The students love the idea and are excited about the opportunity to work on this project. Chen says that Hook invited them to dinner and drinks. His friends think it's a good idea. But Chen says he didn't approve that option, and the students, perplexed, ask why. He argues that they are still too young for such entertainment events upon hearing this. The guys ask if the protagonist has a better idea. Chen suggests going to the student activity center and buying 54 movie tickets. One of his friends dreams of sitting next to Yanin. Suddenly, Yu reminds the protagonist that the cigarette is finished, so he says that without cigarettes he won't be able to think. Then the young man offers to go buy it. The protagonist asks him not to buy cheap cigarettes. The man replies not to worry and that he will buy the right ones for him. After a while, the protagonist approaches Yu, who is sitting at the table reading something in a book. She notices him but is very shy. The protagonist asks if she missed him while he was away. Yu doesn't respond to this, and he says he needs help catching up on his studies. Since he was absent, then he asks if she heard him. She, shyly and hesitantly, answers yes. Suddenly, a girl enters and starts yelling at the protagonist, telling her not to buy from Yu's father. The protagonist looks on and says that Huck arrived at just the right time. He says he has a form to help low-income students and needs help filling it out. The girl is happy when she sees the document and is surprised that the secretary even helped the protagonist get it approved. JQ hesitates to thank the protagonist for the favor, but the young man tells her that when they have time, they should sleep together. She gets angry and feels embarrassed. Jake filled out the application and asked the protagonist when the funds would arrive. He says there's no way to know yet. Then he says that to bring the class together, they need to organize a group movie screening. He mentions that he intends to buy 54 tickets for a class activity. The young man also mentions that the girls and boys will have a raffle to determine who sits with whom. He says this method can break people out of their small groups and bring them together. Plus, the guy suggests that this could lead to a romance developing. At that moment, the guy starts to leave, and the girl looks at him perplexed. She says nothing in response to the proposal. Then he turns around and says that since it's a group event, no one can miss it. Yu is worried, but her friend tells her she should go because he helped her with the financial aid. She advises her to scream if the guy starts to harass her or behave inappropriately in front of the group. The protagonist announces they're having a movie night, explaining that the activity is to bring everyone in the room together. He then points to the box, saying that all the seats will be randomly drawn between guys and girls. The girls like the idea and say they haven't done this in a long time, so the event is sure to be interesting. The students line up for the draw and start pulling numbers from the box one by one. Some announce their results loudly, while others make noise and argue about their spots. Yu looks at her paper and sees the number 7006, remembering the protagonist said they would sit together. At that moment, one of the teachers looks through the window and sees the boys approaching the girls and starting to talk to them. Suddenly, a student approaches the protagonist and asks him what seat he drew. Chen replies that it will be much more interesting if they find out after they get inside the theater. She doesn't like this answer and holds out her hand, asking him to let her see his paper. The girl sees that the number 7007 is written on Chen's paper. She glances at the paper for a second and gets annoyed seeing his number, then tells him to forget it and that they should go to the movies. The protagonist holds his paper in his hands, not knowing what to do. The guys arrive at the event wearing various accessories and decorations. One of them spills several bracelets and another picks out a chain for his neck. The guy asks the protagonist if he likes his hairstyle. The protagonist thinks that no matter what, his friends don't look like adults. He asks the gathered students if they are ready, and they answer that they are. After that, everyone groups up and starts to leave the university building. The doors of the building open, and the students from the protagonist group start to leave first. The girls who dressed up for this event come out. Chen notices that the guys aren't talking to the girls, but he thinks that after watching the movie, several couples might get together. He looks towards the door and wonders why Yu hasn't arrived yet. Suddenly, the girl appears and apologizes for making him wait, stuttering a bit while saying she spent a lot of time studying. She was out of breath and tired. The protagonist turns and starts walking, and Yu apologizes again and starts to follow him. He asks if she wants to eat or drink, to which she answers no to both questions. Chen tells her the movie is long and she might get hungry. She hesitates to answer because she doesn't know if she wants anything. The protagonist tells her to go on ahead, that he will catch up with her in a bit. Yu is left alone at the movie theater entrance, waiting for the protagonist. She wonders if he is upset with her. The girl is alone and sadness is visible on her face. Suddenly, the protagonist comes up from behind with a bag of popcorn, telling her to go on and not just stand there. Suddenly, she clumsily trips on something and starts to fall to the ground. She gets scared and screams, but the protagonist catches her. She looks at him, embarrassed. Chen whispers in her ear to walk more carefully, and she continues to feel shy, blushing at his words. Finally, he takes her hand and guides her. Several dozen students are sitting in the movie theater, watching a movie on the big screen. The protagonist already knows the plot of the movie, but he wants to pretend he doesn't. The guy notices Yu watching the screen, fascinated, observing she has a very thin wrist and doesn't eat meat. He thinks the financial aid will be very useful for her. She notices his gaze on her and looks at him. The girl feels shy with every interaction with the guy. The protagonist pulls the girl's hand so they can hold hands. She starts to get nervous, but Chen pretends not to care and tells her to be quiet because the most interesting part of the movie is about to start. She looks at him and doesn't know what to do in that situation. In the end, she says nothing and keeps holding his hand. The movie ended. The protagonist asks if she liked today's movie. She says she liked it, but that she was sitting for a long time. Chen tells her it didn't seem that long to him, so the young man invites her to go to the movies again. She feels embarrassed and doesn't know how to respond to his proposal. The protagonist asks if her silence can be taken as consent. The girl gets flustered and says that's not what she meant. He says nothing and stares right into her eyes, and Yu looks back at him. The tension grows between them. The protagonist is about to say something to the girl, but he is suddenly interrupted by a passing athlete who ends up shoving the young man. Chen is sent flying right towards the girl. Yu gets scared as he gets too close, and her eyes widen in surprise from the push. His lips touch her face, leading to an awkward kiss-like situation. The athlete runs on and apologizes for pushing the protagonist. The protagonist starts to apologize to Yu, but she can't hear him and begins to panic. The girl is terrified by what's happening and, without thinking, shoves the protagonist. 1. he falls right into a pond. She screams at him, and the athlete watches the situation in surprise. 2, the protagonist gets out of the water and says she almost did him in. 3, the athlete comes over and asks if everything is okay. He thinks that the guy and the girl are arguing. 4, Chen says that the girl has excellent reflexes, and he holds out his hand for her to help him out of the water. She accepts and pulls him out of the pond, soaking wet. He starts to apologize awkwardly. He tells her to go on without him because he needs to go back to the dorm and change to get dry. The protagonist complains because the plan with the movie was a success, but due to a moment of carelessness, all this happened. He leaves the girl, and on the way he sneezes because of the cold. She watches from a distance, and when he disappears from sight, the girl is left alone with her thoughts. She finds the situation funny and laughs a little at the embarrassing moment that happened between them. The protagonist finally returns to the dorm. One of the students approaches the protagonist and starts complaining about how miserable his life is. Chen asks him if his life is really more miserable than his. At that moment, the guy notices that the protagonist is wet and asks him what happened. Chen says he accidentally fell into the lake and that it's nothing special. A student talks about the girl he was supposed to trade tickets with, which is why he had to sit with his aunt. The rest of the students find it funny, but the guy keeps crying about what happened. The protagonist calms him down a bit. The student remains sad because the girl rejected him. He says it would be better if she just ignored him and didn't give him false hope. The guy cries and sings sad songs even after dawn. The students complain that he doesn't let anyone sleep with his singing. The protagonist tells the guy to approach the girl once and for all and to call her right away to go watch some games. At that moment, another student arrives and says he heard about a girl who recently had trouble dealing with unrequited love. So this girl was from a nearby university and lived on the 3rd floor and ended up jumping from there. The guy says she only had minor injuries. The protagonist immediately thinks of Xiao and asks for the address. The young man remembers the fight he had with her a few days ago. He thinks it might be the girl who got hurt and wants to visit her. Chen starts to get ready and leaves the room. His friends tell him it's too late to go anywhere. Chen runs barefoot out of the dorm while they shout after him that he forgot to put on his socks. At that moment, the young man arrives at the correct building and says he is looking for Xiao. The security woman asks for his name. The protagonist lies and gives the girl's father's name. Security calls and says a man wants to see her and that he came to visit. Xiao comes out to the street in her house clothes, thinking her father is looking for her at this time of day. Suddenly, she hears a voice and turns around, noticing the protagonist. Chen says he only gave her father's name so she would come down to talk to him. She calls him a fool and turns to leave. The protagonist tries to reason with her and tells her they should discuss everything calmly. She replies that he should discuss everything with the girls at the bar. He tells her she can leave, but that tomorrow he will come with a big sign and put it at the back of her dorm, saying that she can study because he will take care of the kids. Xiao gets angry at the ridiculous proposal, but sighs and reluctantly agrees to talk to him. The protagonist says he called her many times, but she didn't answer the phone, so he couldn't explain what happened the night of the fight. He says that Sibo had a fight with his mother that day and asked them to go out together. She asks him if his friend invited him to that bar. The girl finds it hard to believe. The protagonist says it was a mistake to have accepted that offer, and that he understands now he should have rejected it. She asks what he was doing at the nightclub. Chen replies that he was just playing pool with Sibo. He tells her that if she doesn't believe him, she can call his friend and ask him. Xiao listens to the explanation and looks at him in silence for a while. Then she walks away from him. Chen doesn't understand what kind of reaction that is. She stands there for a few seconds. Both the boy and the girl are silent. Soon, an awkward silence falls over them. Suddenly, the girl tells him to meet her at the library at 7:30 tomorrow without delay. Without giving him time to answer, she turns around and runs back to her dorm. He watches her, not understanding what just happened. The next day, at 7:30 in the morning, the protagonist arrives and stands at the entrance, wondering why she made an appointment so early in the morning. At that moment, he sees some guys with food packages in their hands. He assumes they came to give breakfast to their girls. Suddenly, the doors open, and 3 girls come out of the library. One of them is Xiao. The girl looks at the protagonist. Then, the guys who were waiting nearby with food all run towards Xiao. They start handing her food packages. One of them bought an egg, Another bought bread, and the third bought a full breakfast. Xiao thanks them, but politely refuses the offered food. One of the guys leaves a food package nearby. He is annoyed by the girl's rejection and says that even if she rejects him, something might work out between them someday. But he is interrupted when the protagonist takes the food the guy left and starts eating it. The guy doesn't understand how this is possible. The protagonist keeps eating without paying attention to the protest, then asks the guy if he'd like to give him his drink. At that moment, Xiao starts to drag him away. The protagonist complains because he wanted to eat more. The three guys look at her annoyed. After a while, Xiao and the protagonist meet at the entrance of the library. She asks him if Chen is interested in knowing who those guys were. 1, he asks who they were. The girl thinks the question was asked insincerely and doesn't want to answer it. 2, she gives him the bag and tells him that she will look for the book and that he can find a spot for now. He sits at a free desk in the library and starts waiting for the girl. He's bored. Xiao returns with books and says she brought him books about his major. Chen replies that he's more interested in law books. She asks him why he needs those books if he doesn't study that discipline. The young man replies that students often start their own businesses and knowing the law can be a great help. Then he says that he doesn't really want to read them and would rather ask a pretty girl from the university to read those books to him. Xiao gets angry at these words, so they remain silent for a while as they study. The protagonist notices a guy in the distance watching them. Chen asks her if she is reading the book about her major, and she answers affirmatively. The protagonist observes that men often turn to her for help, and she agrees. He asks if she used that this morning to scare those guys away. The girl admits that she didn't do it anyway. Suddenly, the protagonist starts to get up from the table and says he wants to make sure no one bothers her again. She doesn't understand what he's talking about. Chen puts his hand on the table and gets closer to the girl, who doesn't know how to react to this. She is surprised by this and doesn't do anything in response. But it doesn't stop with the kiss. 3. The scene changes, and then the protagonist spits a red liquid into the sink. He looks in the mirror and realizes that the girl almost bit his lip. Chen remembers the kiss and thinks that it was the girl's first kiss, which is why she got angry. His friend next to him asks if his lip is purple. He replies that she just bit him a little and there's nothing to worry about. The guy tells him to be careful and also reminds him that there will be a review with the professor soon. So he can't forget about it. Chen hears the phone ring and goes to the balcony. Someone tells him that a girl is probably looking for him. At that moment, he enters the room and answers the phone. Chen asks her about the state of her mouth and worries if he bit her lip. Chen points out that his friend is sitting next to him and, possibly, is listening to his conversation with the girl. The friend gets jealous over this conversation and wonders if the leader has a pretty girlfriend. A while later, there's some action in the university auditorium. Someone is calling for Yu. The cheerful girl looks at her and tells her that her financial aid application for low-income students has been approved. Yu thanks her and is happy with the news she received. She feels much more comfortable with her friend than with others. The girl says that Chen is reliable, and Yu agrees with this. The guys enter the room, including the protagonist. The girls notice him and also pay attention to Yu. The girl remembers the previous situation and feels embarrassed. Quickly looking away from Chen, the protagonist asks her if her financial aid application has been approved, and while speaking, he casually rests his elbow on her shoulder. She, noticing this, wonders why he's doing it. Chen simply replies that he's just saying hello. Then, in a confident tone, he claims that it was thanks to his merit that the application was approved. As they're sorting this out, he adds that they still need to thank the secretary. Leaning towards Yu, he suggests they give her essential gifts, like cakes, as a token of appreciation. However, his friend pushes him aside, asking him how exactly he plans to thank the secretary. Chen replies that Yu should also contribute to the gift. Curious, Yu asks what she should buy. One of his friends playfully mentions that Yu constantly eats dried chilies and suggests giving some to the secretary. Another girl chimes in, saying that Yu found wild vegetables near the dorm and waters them every day. Yu immediately feels embarrassed upon hearing this, and an awkward silence falls over the group. Chen then proposes peeling the vegetables and chilies before giving them to the secretary as a small gesture of gratitude. Although the protagonist doesn't know what chili tastes like, he soon realizes that half the group has never tried it either. Yu, surprised, asks if most people have really never tried chili. 2 days later, Chen and his friends are walking down the street chatting. One of the students complains that his game didn't save. Suddenly, Yu appears, looking frustrated, and starts to complain to the protagonist. Yu is crying. Worried, Chen asks what happened. Yu explains that after she suggested giving the chilies as a gift, she went to the vegetable garden to pick some, and while she was working, she was bitten by insects, leaving red and uncomfortable marks on her skin. Wanting to avoid bothering her roommates with the strong smell, she left the chilies on the balcony overnight. The next morning, she took them to the classroom, but none of the students wanted to try them, complaining about the unpleasant aroma of the vegetables. One of Chen's friends, who had already eaten breakfast, refused to risk trying them. Realizing this, the protagonist assumes that Yu broke down in tears because of their rejection. Chen arrives at the classroom and sees Yu sitting alone in the corner. She remains silent, looking down, with no students sitting near her. 1. She discreetly hides her arm, still marked by the insect bites. 2. The teacher enters the classroom and instructs everyone to take their seats as the class is about to begin. 3, however, Chen steps forward and announces that he must delay the lesson for a moment. Standing in front of the class, he prepares to eat. The room falls silent and all eyes are on him. Juno watches with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Chen approaches the plate of chilies, lifts the lid, and looks at them for a few seconds without saying a word. The students anxiously watch his every move. Then, without hesitation, he picks up a chili with his fingers and puts it in his mouth, chewing slowly. The room remains still as Yu watches him closely. Chen continues to chew, the crunchy sound echoing in the quiet classroom. Then, with a satisfied expression, he declares that the chilies are delicious. Lifting the bowl, he invites everyone to try them. As they taste the chilies, they express their surprise at how good they are, agreeing that you should never judge a book by its cover. More students arrive, intrigued by the commotion, and start eating along with the others. Yu, watching everything unfold, slowly blushes as she sees her classmates enjoying the food. Her sadness fades away. Excited voices fill the room as some students comment that the dish is so good it could even be sold. Others agree, calling it a rare opportunity to try something unique. Overwhelmed with emotion, Yu begins to cry, this time from happiness. Yu dries her tears as her classmates continue to eat, transforming what was once a moment of embarrassment into one of warmth and acceptance.